Do we have to hit the got it button?
Yes.
Yes, please.
All right.
Okay, Chair, we're live.
Thank you, everyone. Welcome to today's meeting of the Learning and Skills Scrutiny Committee. We have one item on the agenda today, and that is to look at the draft of the Welsh in Education Strategic Plan for the period 2022 to 2032. The document, for those of you that are reading it, is a version 4 of the document. It is not the final draft that will be going to Cabinet, and in his introductory presentation, Officer Geraint Rees will be adding a few additional statistics in there that have been firmed up in the intervening time. Before we move on to that, though, we have the two formalities to do with things. So opening up, Wyn, could you let us know which apologies we've had for this meeting?
Had apologies, Chair, from County Councillor Cass Roberts-Jones, Angela Davis, co-opted member, and from the portfolio holder, Councillor Phil Davis.
Thank you. Do any other members have any additional apologies that we are not aware of at this point? No, in which case, again, can I have confirmation that no one has need of declaring an interest in any papers on the agenda?
Pete, sorry, I tried to get my hand up on the last item just to say that I'm going to have to leave by about 10 to 3 because unfortunately I've got no one to do the school run.
Thank you for letting us know, Amanda. I hope it's a smooth school run.
Chair, sorry, I had the same thing. I'm going to have to leave about 10 past 3.
Okay, again, I hope it's a smooth run for you.
Thank you very much.
We now move on to, yes, Councillor Lucy. You're mute, Luke. Yeah.
Sorry, Chair. Yeah, just in terms of interest in any of the items, I wanted to make a comment about the North Paris schools, and of course that is an area that I'm councillor for, so I just wanted to make sure that wasn't an issue.
No, even if you're a governor of a school, you're covered by standard dispensations.
Yes, Chair, as long as you're speaking about schools generally, not the individual school where you are a governor, but I'm assuming you're LEA appointed.
Yeah.
There we are. Then scrap with that comment then. You can't comment about them, but again, we're talking generically about the policy rather than individual schools.
Yeah, that's fine.
Sarah?
Similar for me, really. I just wondered, I'm an RI of a setting. It is mentioned in the document.
As long as we don't mention, I'm not discussing the individual school, I have no issues that you can carry on.
Thank you. In which case, move on to confirmation that no one has received a prohibited party whip in relation to any business today. Thank you for that. In which case, I'll move to Geraint Rees to introduce our main paper, which is the proposed WESP for 2022 to 2032.
Thank you, Councillor Pete. I'll be making good use of the translator for this session, as with will other colleagues in the room as well. Wel, mae'n fraint dod atoch chi yn rhan o'r broses o dynnu cynllun strategol y Gymraeg mewn addysg at ei gilydd. Fel byddwch chi'n gwybod o ddarllen hon, chi wedi cael hi tra bod hi yn ddogfen ddrafft yn hytrach na bod unrhyw un yn gallu dweud bod hi'n orffenedig a felly oedd hi'n rhy hwyr i chi wneud sylwadau. Mae'n rhan o'r fframwaith genedlaethol i ddod â chynllun strategol ger bron. A'r hyn sydd wedi newid yn sylweddol tro yma yw bod y deilliannau fel oedd o'r blaen, ond mae yna 10 mlynedd o gynllun a monitro cyson ar hyd yr amser un o'r pethau sydd wedi codi ar hyd y blynyddoedd yw awdurdodau lleol yn gweithio ar gynllun tair blynedd a wedyn ffindio'n anodd i gyrraedd pen y daith ym mewn tair blynedd pan bod nhw'n gwybod bod angen taclo pethau llawer mwy sylfaenol. A felly mae hon fel cynllun arfaethedig yn gallu bod yn un sy'n rhoi cyfle i weithio arno fe a'i weld e fel rhan o'r newid fydd yn digwydd yn strwythur y drefen addysg yn yr awdurdod ar draws yr holl gymuned ysgolion a thu hwnt i ysgolion hefyd. Mae yna 7 maes penodol a mae'r rheina'n mynd â ni o'r blynyddoedd cynnar, trwyddo dosbarth derbyn, dilyniant o un cyfnod allweddol i'r llall, faint sy'n derbyn i astudio a wneud i arholiadau trwy gyfrwng y Gymraeg ar ddiwedd eu taith yn yr ysgolion, beth sydd ar gael iddyn nhw ddefnyddio iaith o fewn a thu allan i ysgolion, beth yw'r ddarpariaeth ar gyfer rheini a anghenion dysgu ychwanegol, ac yn ola, ac yn gwbl allweddol tro yma, yw'r cwestiwn ynglyn â'r gweithlu a sut ni'n neud yn siŵr bod yna ddigon o staff cefnogol, athrawon, pobl i redeg ysgolion meithrin, y cyfan, cefnogaeth hefyd, seicolegwyr addysg, sut mae'r gweithlu yn dod at ei gilydd. A dyna pam mae angen hon i fod yn olwg hir dymor, a fi'n credu bod yna groeso wedi bod yn genedlaethol i'r cyfle mae hwn yn ei roi ar gyfer mentro dros gyfnod estynedig. Mae Llywodraeth Cymru fel cyd-destun wedi gosod bob awdurdod lleol mewn categori mwyn iddyn nhw gael ystyried pa fath o dargedau fydde yn rhesymol iddyn nhw neu'n fentrus iddyn nhw neu beth bynnag. Y cynnig i ni yn dod ger bron yw bod ni yn anelu at dwf go sylweddol dros y cyfnod yma i fynd o 22.2% o plant ifanca ni'n derbyn i addysg trwy gyfrwng Gymraeg i anelu i fod yn y grŵp 32-36%. Byddwch chi'n ymwybodol yn hanesyddol trawdd Powys yn y 60au a chanran o siaradwyr ifanc fydde wedi bod yn eitha dyniadol ar draws Cymru o ran ffigwr. Mae pethau wedi aros yn yr unfan a weithiau wedi mynd yn ôl tra bod gweddill Cymru wedi symud ymlaen o ran ei darpariaeth. A felly mae'r ffaith bod nhw'n rhoi 10 mlynedd o ffenest i ni, a bod ffenest honno yn digwydd cydredeg gyda'r agenda ehangach i ddiwygio'r drefn addysg ym Mhywys i godi safonau a cynnig darpariaeth cyfach a dewis. Mae'r diwygio'r Gymraeg yn rhan allweddol o hwnna. Felly, yr awgrym sy'n cael ei wneud yn y ddogfen yma yw bod ni'n mynd am y target mwyaf cyflawn o roi her i'r awdurdod a'r gymuned ysgolion a thu hwnt i ymateb iddo fe. Beth fydd yn digwydd ar ddiwedd y broses fydd y ddogfen yma yn datblygu i fod yn ddogfen i ymgynghori arni. A wedyn bydd angen bod ni'n dod nôl drwy'r system i gael cadarnhad bod hi'n ddogfen, beth bynnag yw'r diwygiadau fydd rhwng nawr a fanni, bod y cabinet yn ei mabwysiadu hi fel dogfen sydd yn adlewyrchu nodau'r cyngor i symud ymlaen gyda strategaeth llawn. Mae yna, fel o'n i'n dweud, mae yna ystadegau yn y ddogfen doedd ddim yn bresennol achos o'n i'n aros erbyn bod y ddogfen yn cael ei chyhoeddi fel dogfen ymgynghori. Bydd mwy o ddata 2021 mewn gyda ni, ond dyw reina ddim ar gael ar hyn o bryd. Mae'n gynnar yn y tymor i gael y data llawn ynglyn â beth sydd wedi digwydd o ran y cynnig cwricwlaidd, ond mae yna bethau i ni'n gallu dod i fewn. Bydd Huw yn gallu nodi rheina o ran dilyniant, a mae hefyd un drafodaeth bwysig i gael gyda chi heddi am ran sydd heb ddata, a hwnna yw'r cwestiwn o ar ba gyfradd i ni yn anelu at sicrhau bod dilyniant yn digwydd o'r cynradd i'r uwchradd. Ar hyn o bryd, darn o ddata sydd ar goll yw jyst dros 82% o'n disgyblion ni sydd yn astudio yn y Gymraeg yn y cynradd ac wedyn yn astudio yn y ffrwd Gymraeg yn yr uwchradd, 82%. Nawr, mae hynny ar unrhyw sail yn isel. Mae'n golygu bod ni'n colli bron un o bob 5 o'n holl ddysgwyr ni yn 11 oed. Maen nhw'n gadael y ffrwd Gymraeg ac yn symud i'r ffrwd Saesneg, sy'n golygu bod eu sgiliau dwyieithog nhw yn debygol o aros yn weddol yn yr unfan gyda pa bynnag ddatblygiad sydd yn gallu digwydd. Bydd 'na gwestiwn fyddwn ni'n codi nes mlaen gyda chi yw beth ddylen ni fod yn anelu ato o ran twf rhwng blwyddyn 6 yn y cynradd a blwyddyn 7 yn yr uwchradd. A fydd Huw yn mynd i rafel o hwnna, ond un o'r cwestiynau fyddwn ni'n gofyn i chi yw, a ddylen ni nid fod yn anelu at 100%, dylen ni fod yn anelu at uwch na 100%. Nawr, just fel bod bobl ddim yn meddwl bod ni wedi colli'n marbles yn llwyr, yr hyn, os gewn ni rhaglen drochi effeithiol, mae yna nifer o rieni yn ei penderfyniad pan bod eu plant yn 4 oed, ar sail y wybodaeth sydd gyda nhw pan bod y plentyn yn 4 oed, ac efallai ddim di meddwl hyd yn oed am ddwyieithrwydd y plentyn pan mae'r plentyn yn 4. Erbyn bod nhw'n 8 ac yn 9 yn sylweddoli bod nifer o'r ffrindiau yn gwbl ddwyieithog a bydde fe'n braf petai plentyn nhw'n ddwyieithog. A dyna mae'r gair trochi yn ymddangos yn y ddogfen yma ar y 10au, sef y cyfnod i rywun, a'r term sy'n cael ei ddefnyddio'n aml yw hwyr ddyfodiad. Dyw hynny ddim yn golygu rhywun sy'n symud yn hwyr i fyw yng Nghymru, neu yn hwyr i fyw ym Mhywys, ond rhywun sy'n penderfynu'n hwyr licen nhw i plentyn fod yn ddwyieithog am reswm symud, neu jyst am bod nhw mewn sefyllfa o fod â ymwybyddiaeth wahanol bod y plentyn yn hun. Felly, mewn ardaloedd eraill yng Nghymru, mae cyfle rhwng blwyddyn 6 a blwyddyn 7, sef o'r cynradd i'r uwchradd, i rieni a plentyn neu penderfyniad licen nhw fod yn ddwyieithog. A mae yna fodeli trochi a gall Huw siarad am rai o'r una o brofiad uniongyrchol ohonyn nhw, lle mae plentyn yn gallu cael cyfnod i allu pontio i addysg sy'n diogelu dwyieithrwydd naturiol iddyn nhw. Felly y cwestiwn yw, faint o gyfle ni am roi i bobl yn 11 oed ac yn 4 oed, yn amlwg yn ddelfrydol, mae rhywun yn ei penderfyniad yn ifancach, ond mae angen y cyfle hynny. A hefyd y cyfle hwnnw i deulu sy'n symud i fyw yng nghefn gwlad Cymru o unrhyw le yn y byd, i'r plentyn gallu cael sgiliau dwyieithog wrth fynd trwy proses drochi. Felly, yn fras, wedi esbonio meysydd y ddogfen, cefnogaeth i ddisgyblion anghenion arbennig yn gwbl allweddol, a wedyn mae'r gweithlu yw'r clo ar y mater, a mae angen i ni edrych ar sut ni'n denu bobl i weithio am Mhywys, sut ni'n cymhwyso'r gweithlu, sut ni'n hyfforddi athrawon, i ni'n digwydd bod yn awdurdod lleol sydd heb goleg hyfforddi athrawon, enghraifft, wedi sefydlu o fewn y sir. Ond mae yna ffyrdd eraill o symud ymlaen gyda'r agenda honno, a beth ni'n gallu gwneud i helpu athrawon neu gynorthwywyr dosbarth sydd eisiau pontio draw i weithio yn ddwyieithog yn hytrach na'n Saesneg yn unig. Felly mae'r ddogfen yn cwmpasu'r cyfan hynny, a o ran y manylion, fel awgrymodd y cadeirydd, yr awgrym bod ni'n mynd wrth gam drwyddo fe, a mae Delyth sydd yn adnabyddus i chi gyd, yn un o hoelion 8 Powys, a Huw a finne yma, ond os oes angen i alw rhywun arall mewn, fe wnawn ni hynny hefyd. Dwi'n gweld bod Emma Palmer yn eistedd yn y cefndir hefyd, a mae Emma yn goruchwylio trawsnewid addysg ar draws y sir gyda'r tîm, felly os oes na fater fanna, ni'n fwy na hapus i siarad. Felly na'r cefndir, a dyna'r her sylweddol iawn sydd dyn ni, a faint o'n bobl ifanc ni allwn ni gael yn gwbl amlieithog ac yn gallu mwynhau bywyd cyflawn iawn yn ddiwylliannol yn ddwy iaith a mwy. Dyna'r nod a beth sydd angen i wneud. Felly, diolch.
Thank you, Geraint. As you indicated right at the end, we're going to move on to looking at the first outcome, which is around bringing more nursery and 3-year-olds into education through the medium of Welsh. I've got a couple of queries been passed through to me already about this, and I'm going to open up with a question from someone who's not actually here today, and that is looking at the actual provision of education and the heavy reliance on Myddiad Maithrin. Obviously, it's a voluntary organisation with individual groups of volunteers. The concern has to be is, are we going to have sufficiently robust agreements with this organisation around the ongoing provision, and particularly the development in areas where we don't have that provision already? I'm thinking particularly, for example, the Gwenavyd catchment, where there isn't a presence. And yes, Geraint, in response to your response in the chat, yes, thank you. It would be appreciated if you respond in the language that you've been asked the question.
Right. Well, that first question, Councillor Pete, is around the first of our objectives, and I'm just wondering whether for Delith, who's been engaged with a group looking at this whole area, whether I turn to Delith for input on these lines.
Diolch Geraint, diolch Pete. O ran deilliant 1, dych chi eisiau fi roi chydig o naratif gyntaf, wedyn nawn ni trwy ateb y cwestiwn, mi roi chydig o naratif byr ar ddeilliant 1. A mae nifer o'r deilliannau yma wrth gwrs yn gorgyffwrdd, felly mi fyddai yn cyfeirio wrach at hyfforddiant wrth fynd trwy rhai o'r deilliannau cychwynnol yma. Ond mae'r deilliant yma, fel dwi'n siŵr dych chi gyd yn gallu deall, yn un allweddol, oherwydd dyma man cychwyn y daith tuag at addysg ddwyieithog gyflawn. Hynny yw bod y disgyblion bod y plant yn gwbl rhugl yn y Gymraeg a'r Saesneg. A mi welwch chi bod yn darpariaeth cyfredol mewn meithrinfeydd preifat, gofal plant a cofrestredig, a hefyd mudiad meithrin. A dwi'n credu ateb y pwynt yna, dyn ni'n gweithio'n agos iawn gyda mudiad meithrin. Mae yna gefnogaeth frwd gan y mudiad i gynyddu'r darpariaeth ac i weithio hefo'r bobl allweddol yn y clysterau, yn yr ardaloedd yma. A mae yna commitment, os ddedwch chi, ganddyn nhw hefyd. A gennon ni, pan fyddwn ni'n ail edrych ar y tendro nes ymlaen o ran y gofal cyn ysgol. Felly, mae'r ddarpariaeth mewn meithrinfeydd, fel dwi'n dweud, mae'r cysga'n nodi beth sydd ganddo ni yn gyfredol. A dwi'n mynd trwyddo, mae'r data yna, enghraifft 18 o ddarpariaethau cyfrwng Gymraeg, cyn ysgol ac ati, a wedyn beth sydd ganddo ni o ran y cylch meithrin, a faint o'r hynny wedyn sydd yn trosglwyddo, mae trosglwyddo yn rhywbeth allweddol i addysg gyfrwng Gymraeg. Yn 2020, ychydig dros 90 canran, mi welwch chi'n y cysga, ein targed ni ydy bod os di plant ymynychu mudiad cylch meithrin, bod nhw wedyn yn trosglwyddo i addysg gyflawn Gymraeg. A dyna lle mae eisiau sicrhau bod yna ddarpariaeth yn y dalgylchoedd hyn ar gyfer hynna. Mae hefyd yn nodi faint o gylchoedd tu a fi sydd yn llwyddiannus iawn ar gyfer cael rhieni fod yn ymgysylltu â'i gilydd, yn parhau ar y daith i ddeall beth yw gwerth dwyieithrwydd, beth yw'r daith, a dwi'n credu ochr yn ochr â hyn, cyfleoedd hefyd i rhieni gael gwersi Cymraeg. Fel bod nhw ar y daith efo'u plant. A jyst i nodi, mi ddaru ni gael cyfarfodydd ymgysylltu neu gweithdy efo penaethiaid ar ddiwedd tymor yr haf, ac oedd hwnnw'n llwyddiannus iawn, oedd o'n gadarnhaol, ac roedd nifer o'r penaethiaid yn gweld y pwysigrwydd, ac mae o'n nodi yn y deilliant yma ac yn sawl deilliant arall, hyrwyddo manteision dwyieithrwydd. Mor bwysig yw bod yn rhieni ifanc neu hyd yn oed cyn y genedigaeth yn deall ac yn wir deall beth yw dwyieithrwydd a beth yw'r manteision. A mae'n gwefan taith at iaith ni yn atgyfnerthu hynny. Mi welwch chi bod yna ddatblygiadau eraill, enghraifft twf yn ysgol Dafydd Llwyd. Mae ganddo ni ganolfan blynyddoedd cynnar newydd yn Nyffryn y Glowyr sydd yn gyffrous, a hefyd mwy o ddatblygu o ran Flying Start, enghraifft yn Aberhonddu yn ysgol y Banau. Dwi wedi nodi yr angen i hyrwyddo. Dyn ni'n gwybod bod datblygu'r gweithlu yn ddeilliant saith, ond eto mae'n allweddol os dyn ni'n mynd i roi darpariaeth blynyddoedd cynnar cyn ysgol gofal plant, be maen nhw'n galw y darpariaeth gyflawn yma, mae angen staff, mae angen i'r darpariaeth fod o safon. A dyma lle dyn ni'n edrych ar ddatblygu cyrsiau fel y BTEC, gofal plant ac ati i blant ôl 16, neu ddisgyblion, sori, neu ddysgwyr ôl 16. Fan'na, dyn ni'n sôn eto am bod y tendro ar gyfer y blynyddoedd cynnar, a be dyn ni eisiau fan'na ydy datblygu mwy o ddarpariaeth cyfrwng Gymraeg mewn ardaloedd penodedig sydd wedi'i rhestru yn y ddogfen hon. Ac eto, mi welwch chi fan'na bod ni'n bwriadu cydweithio efo arweinwyr a staff i symud nhw yn Llyryd y Continwwm neu i wella'r darpariaeth fel bod o'n fwy pur o ran cyfrwng Gymraeg. A dyna lle dyn ni isio, fel ydych chi wedi nodi fan'na, cynyddu'r ddarpariaeth Cylch TF a Cylch Meithrin, a trwy'r sefydlu a symud y prosiect yna. A wedyn, dwi wedi sôn am hyrwyddo manteision dwyieithrwydd, mae'n allweddol, a fel ddwedais i wrth o trwa efo'r penaethiaid, a datblygu'r gweithlu. A wedyn, chydig o gyfeiriad at ddatblygu o ran adnoddau ag ati. Dwi'n meddwl dyna grynodeb byr o ddeilliant 1, Cadeirydd.
Thanks for that, Dilys, and it definitely gives us a background. It didn't quite cover the specific that I was asking for, which is the confidence that we have in the Ed Maithrin and Cylch TF to actually be able to break into and deliver services in the areas where we don't have Welsh provision at the moment. So I'll taking away what you've said to me and storing it away for later, but I do ask again, what confidence do we have in the voluntary sector and volunteer organisations in being able to expand and deliver our requirements there? Are we confident that our agreements, SLAs, however we are framing it, with those organisations will actually deliver the expansion in areas where basically we have no Welsh provision to start with, therefore no hope of gaining Welsh provision at primary level?
Shall I come in on that one, Councillor Pete?
By all means, Karen.
Yeah, this is a significant challenge. It's always easier to raise the game where you already exist, but we have whole areas of Powys where there isn't primary provision in Welsh. So, you know, the valley running down from Hay on Wye, the area around Prestine, and the Crickhowell Secondary School area are all at the moment without. This is where it needs to be linked with the wider transformation strategy, that we seek those opportunities. You'll be aware that as of this term, Ysgol Cribberth down in the south of the county is piloting a reception class to see how that might play out. And I think we probably need innovative approaches like that over the coming years to ensure that a family living in any of the three areas I mentioned are able to start the journey and be supported by the local authority. So that is something that is going to be innovations needed, I think it is what we'd be saying there.
So in essence, to my question, and I'll pass on to Brennan in a second, you're saying that whilst the Ed Maithrin are our main provider at the moment, you're looking at options that may resolve in more provision through our primary school network as well as Nyddiaid Maithrin in order to expand the offer?
I think it's a bit of a chicken and egg situation, really, because if there isn't a primary provision, the question is, why would you put in a nursery provision? But at the same time, if you have a primary provision, you need to have had a nursery provision. And I think in order to unlock that, we'll need a bit of innovation, and we probably will need. Mudiad Maithrin is inevitably the partner that we would go to. They have a national profile. They're part of a more global community as well of understanding how language acquisition works with tried and tested processes. They've got materials that can be used and transferred from one Cylch to the other. They have training programs in place. So they are our natural partners, but to encourage them to establish in areas where there's no primary education, it would only be honourable that we say what we as a local authority would put in place then to make sure that there is a proper transition for those children. So that whole bit needs unpicking as part of the wider development in those areas.
Okay, well, we can come back to that when we look at the primary sector in a minute. Bryn, all yours.
Iawn, diolch yn iawn. Dwi'n meddwl bod i gyd yn cytuno ar y bwriad a'r targed yn y pen draw a'r nod ac yn y blaen. Ond cwestiwn penna sgynnaid, da newydd clywed am yr llym ardaloedd o Bowys lle bydd hi'n anodd i cychwyn a cynnal addysg Gymraeg yn y sector cynradd a cyn cynradd. Ond serch hynny, ydych chi'n teimlo bod y targedau 14% ar ôl 10 mlynedd yn ddigon uchelgeisiol? Achos, ydych chi'n awgrymu mae dyna'r uchaf mae'r Llywodraeth yn awgrymu, ond ar y llaw arall, mae targed gen y Llywodraeth ydy bod miliwn o siaradwyr, sef treian o'r boblogaeth, yn siarad Cymraeg erbyn 2050. Wel, mae hynny'n golygu yn y bôn bod plant, pawb sy'n addysg angen bod yn ddwyieithog erbyn 2050. Mae'r cynllun yma mynd i cymryd tan amcan gyfrifi oedd 2066 cyn bod pawb yn blwyddyn 1 yn cael addysg ddwyieithog. Mae'r term at pace yn cael ei ddefnyddio sawl tro trwy'r ddogfen. Dydy hwn ddim yn swnio fel at pace i fi. Mae o'n os na modd gweld uchelgais mwy uchelgeisiol.
Na i ddod nôl fan'na. Yr hyn mae'r Llywodraeth wedi gwneud yw gweithio ar draws Cymru, edrych ar tasau targedau, amrywiaeth o targedau i bob awdurdod lleol yn dibynnu ar ble maen nhw nawr, sut maen nhw'n cyrraedd y miliwn o siaradwyr trwy ddatblygiad ym mhob ardal. Felly, maen nhw hefyd, erbyn hyn, mae yna ddealltwriaeth gynyddol o'r heriau o fwrw mlaen. Beth ddigwyddodd yn y cylchoedd diwetha o gynlluniau strategol yw oedd awdurdodau yn gosod nodau weithiau ddim yn anghyraddadwy, a wedyn yn dweud ar ôl ni, wel, oedd e'n fentrus beth bynnag. Mae yna ddisgwyliad bod bobl yn gwireddu i targedau tro yma, a bod e'n rhan o strategaeth gyflawn addysg. Felly, oedd e'n braf tasyn ni'n mynd ynghynt, a wi'n meddwl mae hynny'n ddibynnol ar y gymuned addysgol ym Mhywys a chithau fel awdurdod lleol i ddatblygu agwedd gadarnhaol at y cyfan, ond mae hwn, ni wedi gosod y stondin yn ôl beth mae'r Llywodraeth yn disgwyl fydde yn gam bras ymlaen, a mae'n gam bras i gymaru ble ni wedi bod, ond a dwi'n ddigon bras, gawn ni weld pa mor gyflym gall bobl symud gyda ni ar hwn. Wi'n clywed yr hyn chi'n dweud, Cynghorydd Bryn.
Come back if you want, mate. Are you okay, Bryn?
Yeah. I think it is what it is. It's I mean, does dim cynnydd wedi digwydd hyd y gwrn ni efo'r 2 cysga cynt. Mae llawer o bethau sydd wedi cael ei roi mewn yn y cysga dros y 10 mlynedd dwytha heb cael ei gwireddu o gwbl. So,
Thanks very much for that observation, Bryn. I'm going to bring Margaret in a second, but a number of colleagues have commented in the chat that some of the tables around the numbers of groups and where they are, there look to be a number of inconsistencies in them. So could officers take that away and look at that before it comes before Cabinet? I don't think we need to clarify it in the meeting now. What I do want to clarify is there is mention of a setting in Oswestry, which is obviously out of county. I wonder whether you could expand on the role that plays within our plans.
I'll need to turn to Delith for any wisdom on that. But can I just ask a question around logistics? If we were meeting in Teams, the chat would be there for us to be able to download afterwards and make sure that we address each of the points in it. I'm just wondering whether this technology allows this to happen, or whether we need to arrange for somebody to take a note of the chat. Otherwise, we lose it forever. I'm not sure about the difference between Zoom and Teams, but we don't want to be losing what's in the chat.
Wyn, could you clarify?
It is downloaded at the end of the meeting. I'll just double check that now while I'm saying this.
That's helpful. Okay. Right.
And Delith, could you enlighten us about Oswestry? Is it genuinely Oswestry, or is it an Oswestry postcode?
I think it's an Oswestry postcode. I don't think that we have discussed anything about having the provision in Oswestry. Which page is it on? Not when in the meetings I've been on. Which page is that on?
It's on page 6 of the WESP, or page 15 if you're looking at our documentation for today.
Mae yna cylch ti a fi yn groes oswell. Mae'n cael ei gefnogi gan Mudiad Meithrin.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
Dwi ddim yn gwybod dim mwy. Dwi ddim yn gwybod dim mwy am hynna. Fydda rai fi ofyn i rai o'r swyddogion sydd wedi bod ynghlwm a hwnna. Mae'n ddrwg gen i. Dwi ddim yn gwybod. Allai ddim roi ateb cadarnhaol i chi ar hwnna. Fydda rai fi ofyn.
Thanks. I do know anecdotally Oswestry is meant to be one of the largest Welsh-speaking areas outside of Wales. So it wouldn't surprise me if there's one there, and we've got parents that are working in Oswestry taking advantage of it. But I'm just interested in the role that it plays in supporting the Welsh language in North East Powys. Margaret, you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you. It's on workforce development, really. Staffing is key to all future developments. And so post-16 BTEC at level 3 is starting this, students are starting this at this point, I understand. So do we have numbers of students for this year, and where are they going? Which colleges are providing that? And what are the future aims in relation to student numbers that you taking Welsh medium, BTECs through the medium of Welsh?
Geraint, if you don't have an immediate figure on that, but could get it during the meeting, I'm happy to invite Margaret back in at the on the workflow outcome if you need time for an officer to find that out.
And in fact, it may take longer than this meeting because enrolment only happened last week and inductions happening this week. So we may need to come back to you afterwards, or even to note what the enrolments will have been by the time this document goes live.
That would be helpful. I'm aware that a lot of the statistics we may ask for are works in progress and could be available anytime. It's the problem of being at the start of the academic year, isn't it?
It is, yeah. Okay, but no, it's an important one, and it's just to observe as well, as Margaret has just done. Workforce is the absolute key to this. We can do whatever we want. If we don't get the workforce ready for it, then it's a pipe dream, and therefore this is crucial as well, because this could be educated in Powys, trained in Powys, working in Powys. This is an important development for all sorts of reasons.
I'm going to invite Lucy, but we will come back to work stream, because I have a few questions there. But Councillor Lucy.
Yeah, thank you, Pete. I absolutely fully support getting children involved at the earliest stage in the Welsh language. But I have a concern that in my area, a number of children, my own were included in this, went to a play school that's actually over the border in England. And although they did speak a little Welsh, I think, in the play group, that's, Powys presumably doesn't have any influence over that. So I wondered how that might pan
out. I think we have a 2,000-year history of lack of success on encouraging activities across the border from being conducted in Welsh. We've struggled with ourselves sometimes, so it is a challenge. And the geography of Powys often doesn't help with wonky borders and the proximity of home to some villages and towns being easier in England than it is in Wales. But we must redouble our efforts throughout, I think, to make sure what's this side of the border that we do influence positively.
Thank you for that, Geraint. Lucy, I think it's down to us to lobby our respective parties across the border to improve the education across there. I think we've got more influence than Geraint somehow.
I think so.
Michael, and then Bryn, I'll come back to you in the next section if you don't mind, but I'd like to move on to the primary.
Oh, thank you very much, Chair. No, will be very brief. My question is, are there no Wales-wide from the Assembly or wherever funding to help set up Welsh language play groups, ysgolfaethrins, etc., where there is currently no provision? I'm obliged, Chair.
Thank you, Michael.
I'll come back on that. Mudiad Meithrin is a national body, and it has very close relationships with Welsh Government, as other preschool groups do. And therefore, when we will need those conversations with them, it'll be on the basis that hopefully they will have some support to be able to do that, but we owe it to them then to ensure progression is possible. But it's an ongoing conversation, and they have been stakeholder partners in the forum that exists for the dialogue around this Welsh in Education Strategic Plan as well. So they know what we're putting forward. It's known to them.
Thank you, Geraint. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I was going to ask this question right at the end, but Councillor Amanda has put it in the chat just now, and as she told us at the start, she has to disappear to look after her contribution to the education service. Amanda, would you like to come in now and ask Geraint about your question about moving forward, and we'll use this as the switch point to the second outcome.
Yeah, sorry, Chair, that this is slightly out of kilter with your going through the outcomes. Mine is just more of a general question about obviously this is moving to consultation, and my query is how are we going to ensure that all diverse socio and economic groups and within Powys is covered with this? And I know that's always our aim when we consult, but given that we've moved much more to online consultations, particularly during the pandemic, I think it's really important that we try and think outside of the box to try and ensure meaningful consultation, particularly trying to get more governors to respond to consultations. I know that there's an LEA governor briefing tomorrow night, which there'll be a whole host of new governors going to. Can we have it on the agenda to really encourage governor engagement in all education consultations. And because I think, because obviously there's been, you know, a number of consultations recently on area specific or specific schools, that's the only thing that they look out for. But because this is so broad, and there will be differing opinions across Paris on how best to achieve the objectives. You know, and I would agree that no one doesn't want to achieve those objectives, but how we do that across such a diverse county may come with a whole host of opinions on it. And I think it's really important that we capture those and we give people the opportunity and the courage as well to come forward with those opinions, because sometimes people hold back on this subject because they don't want to say the wrong thing. Despite the fact they agree with the objective, they may have a viewpoint that they want to share, and I really want to make sure we capture that. As I said, I fully agree with the objective. I just want to ensure we capture all the views on achieving that. Diolch yn fawr. And I'm sorry, I've got to rush off.
Amanda, don't worry. One of the advantages of the online meeting is you've actually been able to join us at all. So thank you for that contribution. Geraint, I think that's very much one for you.
I'll come back on it. There's guidance around who are statutory partners in a consultation, and governors of all schools within the local authority would be part of that. But Councillor Amanda's right. Many of our consultations have been around individual school proposals, and what you then have is high levels of interest in that community and everybody else standing back saying, well, I hope they don't visit us next, because that's the way these things are quite often. However, we didn't get to having a school transformation strategy without widespread engagement. That was thrown open, including learner voice engagement across schools, teachers, governors, and opportunity for the wider public to contribute. What we've had is a massive upturn in the level of responses that we get through having moved online. We've ended up initially, we had people saying, well, you can't consult because people won't be able to take part. But actually, we're talking about having hundreds of responses at the moment for communities where there are only a few hundred people living in total. So this we will throw this out there, and it does need to be publicised properly. The issue around diversity that Councillor Amanda raised is an important one as well. I think of ensuring it's absolutely crucial that the Welsh language belongs to everybody, and we don't want any parents to be excluded from that opportunity for lack of knowledge of its existence as an educational opportunity. So we'll have a discussion with Emma and her comms team around how we manage this, but we do need a wide net on it in order to be able to, because this is part of awareness raising, let alone listening. So it's helpful it's been raised. Thank you.
I think that's an important response, an area, and I think that's an area where all of us as councillors have a responsibility, particularly those of us that are very active on social media. And I trust that the comms team will involve us perhaps more extensively than normal so that we actually get this consultation completely right, so there is as much community buy-in as possible. Margaret, I know you and Bryn have got your hands up, but I want to move on to the primary sector. So if it's not relating to the primary sector, I'll come back to you at a later stage. So Geraint, is there anything you particularly want to highlight in the outcome on the primary sector before we move to questions?
If you'd be content, I'll ask Delith just to highlight some of those areas that have emerged from the conversations that have been. Is that okay? And
that's fine.
Yeah.
Diolch Geraint. Ie, deilliant 2, mwy o blant derbyn, plant 5 oed. A dyn ni'n nodi fanna ble mae'r darpariaeth, naill lle mewn ysgolion cyfrwng Gymraeg neu ysgolion dwy ffrwd ar hyn o bryd. A wedyn, fel ydych chi'n gweld, be di canran o blant sydd ganddo ni, o blant derbyn ar hyn o bryd yn cael ei addysg trwy gyfrwng Gymraeg. Be sydd wedi digwydd, Ysgol Gymraeg y Trallwm, Ysgol Cwmbanwy ac ati, dyn ni'n nodi hynny, a hefyd, fel dwedodd Geraint, cyfeiriad Ysgol y Cribarth yn ystod gynlais sydd wedi agor dosbarth derbyn y tymor yma. Yn fan hyn, rhan allweddol o'r deilliant yma ydy'r gefnogaeth ar gyfer yr hwyr ddyfodiaid, a mae Geraint wedi cyfeirio at beth dyn ni feddwl trwy hynny, y trochi. A mae yna lot o gefnogaeth wedi digwydd yn ystod Covid ac yn ystod y blynyddoedd diwetha o ran rhoi cymorthydd yn ysgol, cefnogi'n ysgolion, ond dyn ni gyd yn gwybod mae'r model sydd yn llwyddiannus mewn nifer o awdurdodau lleol yw cael canolfan drochi, ble mae'r plant yn mynychu, y plant sydd yn hwyr ddyfodiad neu eisiau newid y daith tuag at dwyieithrwydd llawn, ble maen nhw yn mynychu ac yn cael eu trochi ac yn cael ei boddi yn y Gymraeg, yn cael gwersi dyddiol, gweithgareddau sy'n llawn hwyl ysbryd, ond i ddysgu gaffael yr iaith. Dyn ni'n gwybod bod hyn yn digwydd yn yr ysgolion yn effeithiol yn y cyfnod sylfaen, ond mae eisiau datblygu'r darpariaeth yna. A mae ganddo ni wasanaeth rwan swyddogion y Gymraeg oedd yn Athrawon Bro sydd wedi dechrau yn rhithiol, ond sydd am ddatblygu'r ddarpariaeth yma. A dyn ni yn gobeithio fod ni'n cynnig peilot cyn diwedd y tymor yma mewn un ysgol yng Ngogledd Powys mwyn wir paratoi a dathlu llwyddiannau trochi a rhoi mynediad i addysg gyflawn ddwyieithog i ganran o ddisgyblion. Dyn ni'n cyfeirio nôl at yr hyrwyddo unwaith eto. Dyn ni hefyd as datblygiad staff, a pan ydych chi'n gweld fan hyn tric a chlic, dyma darpariaeth ffonolegol a darpariaeth ar gyfer darllen sydd yn bob ysgol gynradd ym Mhywys, o cyfrwng Saesneg hefyd yn dilyn ac yn rhoi'r medre cynnar yma i'n disgyblion. Dwi'n angen esbonio'r cludiant, dwi'n meddwl ydych chi gyd yn ymwybodol o'r newid ar gyfer y polisi cludiant a'r prosiectau y capital fanna sydd isio. A dyn ni'n sôn fan hyn am y plant sydd o gefndiroedd gwahanol yn gallu cael mynediad ac yn gallu cael eu trochi i'r Gymraeg. A dyma beth dyn ni'n nodi fan hyn, eto dyn ni wedi cyfeirio eto o fewn y 5 mlynedd, bod ni yn gallu datblygu mwy o ddarpariaeth gyfrwng Gymraeg. Eto i gael y dilyniant yma, os dyn ni'n mynd i gael darpariaeth cyn ysgol, bod ni'n gallu cael darpariaeth cyfrwng Gymraeg cynradd ar gyfer y disgyblion, a hefyd datblygu mwy ar y darpariaeth Gymraeg mewn clysterau fel sydd wedi nodi fanna mwyn cynyddu'r nifer yma. Mae yn uchelgeisiol i gael bwrw'r darged, mae rhaid i ni gynyddu y nifer o ddysgwyr sy'n gallu cael mynediad at addysg ddwyieithog. A dyn ni gyd yn gwybod hefyd, dyn ni'n gallu symud ysgolion dwy ffrwd ar hyd y continuum, mae gen i enghreifftiau o hynny. Dyn ni'n gallu sefydlu ysgolion cyfrwng Gymraeg, a dyn ni hefyd eisiau ymchwilio i'r posibilrwydd o ddatblygu dosbarth cyfrwng Gymraeg mewn ysgolion sydd ar hyn o bryd yn darparu cyfrwng Saesneg yn unig. So dyma model Ysgol y Cribarth, ble mae yna dosbarth cyfrwng Gymraeg wedi dod. Mi fyddwn ni'n edrych ar arfer dda, enghraifft adroddiad thematig estyn ar caffael iaith, ac maen nhw ar hyn o bryd yn cysylltu efo ysgolion ym Mhywys i wneud mwy ar yr adroddiad thematig caffael iaith y tymor yma, ac eto cefnogi, fel dyn ni wedi dweud, mudiad meithrin ac ar dilyniant. Eto'r hyrwyddo, datblygu'r staff, a dyna ble dyn ni'n rhoi mwy o wybodaeth i chi am y cynllun trochi. A dyn ni wedi clywed ddoe gan y Llywodraeth bod na 2.4 miliwn o bunnoedd i awdurdodau lleol tuag at trochi, ac wrth gwrs i'r Steddfod Genedlaethol fydd yn hyrwyddo deilliant 5. Felly, Cadeirydd, gobeithio bod hwnna'n crynhoi prif nodweddion deilliant 2.
Thank you for that, Delith. Bruni is going to come on in a second, but a first observation before we move on to questioning. The table at the start of outcome 2 currently contains the Welsh Medium Plask data, for the dual stream schools particularly, it would be helpful to have the English stream as well to help understand the potential that those schools have in terms of increasing numbers, and potentially I would challenge you to have a little bit more detail about where you think the new Welsh speakers are going to come from, because it's very easy to say we'll establish a new provision in an area, but I think it's possibly easier to achieve by expanding the Welsh stream at those dual stream schools. So just a feel, where do you think the bulk of the new Welsh learners, Welsh language learning pupils are going to come from?
Yes, well, we know when we look at the dual stream, that's a point taken. I'm sure we can add those. But for example, Ysgol Rhyw now, there's far more pupils coming into the English stream into the Welsh stream, sorry, in Ysgol Rhyw the numbers. So the balance is switching. They're far more in the Welsh medium class. We all know what's happened in Ysgol Dyffryn Trannon. Far more. Again, we want to target some of these to increase bills. I think from my last conversation with them, more again in the Welsh stream than in the English. The patterns there. So I guess, and Ysgol Bro-Hyddgen, as we know, far more in y Gymraeg, and they're going along the language continuum at the moment. So does that answer? So it's targeting those.
It gives me the indication that there is in terms of the targets, there's actually less scope for expanding the Welsh provision in those streams, and there's more scope for establishing new provision in areas where we have none at all. It's not to say there's no scope for improvement, but that's what I'm taking away from what you've just said to me. Would that be a correct interpretation?
No, we want to increase the provision. We want to increase, because obviously, as we said, in those catchment areas where we haven't got Welsh provision, we want to increase the Welsh provision, don't we? Because there's no point then having preschool.
That's what I'm saying. There's more scope in those areas where there's no provision to drive this growth forward, rather than in terms of progressing schools along the language pathway. That in and of itself won't deliver our aims.
No.
Okay, I'm going to take Councillor Lucy first and then Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. Looking at objective 2, and I'm particularly looking on page 22 of our papers, it talks about a new Welsh school on the North Powys border, and I know, and through school transformation, that there have been conversations about a new school potentially in the Llandrynio, Ardlean, Four Crosses, Carragova area. I have some concerns that where, for instance, in Welshpool, you have a new Welsh stream school that sits alongside an English stream school, and the pupils still have some choice as to which provision they want to use. I mean, those people who know me well will know that my own children travelled into Llanfachlin to attend a Welsh medium school. So I support that entirely, but I do worry that there will be other families who live in the border areas, and if they don't have a choice between a Welsh or English stream school within Powys, will be looking to move their children to be educated outside Powys, and we will lose children over the border. So I think we need to be mindful of that, and that's something that we perhaps need to consider as part of the consultation. I don't know how you do that, because you obviously don't want to encourage people to think about going outside the area, but it is a concern that I have. Thank you.
Geraint Ellis, do you want to respond to that? Or
shall I come back on that?
Yeah.
That's a point helpfully made there. And I think this is where the whole issue around the normalisation of the medium of instruction is something that we're some way from there, I think, in some parts of Powys at the moment, where it's been interesting in the couple of years I've worked in Powys, people expressing concern that if a child's educated in Welsh, they won't be able to access the rest of the world in English. And nothing could be further from the truth, really, in terms of the outcomes for learners who study in Welsh. Have strong bilingual skills and naturally lend themselves to multilingual skills and other things. So, and Councillor Lucy will know that from her family experience, but we just need to make sure that we've normalised things strongly enough that people don't feel the need to migrate out when what they have is an opportunity for their child to benefit from bilingualism. But it is a challenge, and we'll need to address that with we need it done in partnership with Mudiad Meithrin around the whole issue. You will have seen, hopefully, the publicity materials that have become available over recent months to try and raise awareness around bilingualism and the opportunities of having a child educated in Welsh. But it's not something we can just rest on. We need to keep encouraging it so that the opportunity, it's seen as an opportunity, not a threat. I think that's ultimately what it comes down to. But planning this would be over to the transformation team to look at how they would intend to plan in these circumstances.
Can I come back in, Pete? Just
go back, please. Yes.
I'm slightly concerned about, and there are a number of mentions in the document about the website and the impact that will have on parents in persuading them to use Welsh language education. And I feel that we need something more imaginative and more, something that just has a bit more go about it. I don't want to be critical, but I looked at the website myself and thought, actually, there's not very much in that would persuade me if I was thinking, which way do I go? There's nothing that really grabs me.
Can I come in there? Can I come in there? Okay, that's mewn fanna. Is that okay?
Yes.
Yes, good point, Councillor Lucy, but also it's just one of many things, isn't it? We've got the social media aspect. We're going to have case studies. We want this mention of having ambassadors, people that have had their education through the medium of Welsh or fully bilingual education. What are the advantages? We've got some good case studies that we can share, we can build. They need to be updated. Again, having leaflets, having promotion things in the admission packs when they first, having promotions in the surgeries when they go for their checks with their young children. And it's all about sharing good stories and working, I think, Successful Futures mentions the Welsh medium schools being hub for English medium schools, so helping them in promoting. And again, we need to develop our learners, and it's a key part of the Estyn framework, that they know themselves, and it comes to outcome 5 again, that they understand the advantages of bilingualism as well, so that they can share with parents and with their community. So there's a strong link here with outcome 5, where we want schools to share the advantages of bilingualism, and some schools come up with some innovative ideas themselves about sharing the advantages in their community. So they've got ownership for that as well. I don't know if that answers your question.
I think it's possibly easier to share that where you in a dual stream school where you're trying to persuade more people to join the Welsh stream, but it's a harder pitch, I think, where you haven't got that mix to start with.
I think it's an interesting question Councillor Lucy raised, and I think one of the observations we might want to make is that whilst these outcomes and the whole flow of the document is focused on actual measurable outcomes, there might need to be more narrative around how we are planning to achieve this recognition that Welsh medium education is a benefit, not an exclusion. I mean, I noticed when I was preparing yesterday in my social media feeds, Bangor University have published a study saying that on average bilingual pupils were 6.5% more efficient in their thinking skills. So I think that there is evidence out there, but I think we need to articulate it better. And that might be something we can reflect in some way in our response, that's an area that this could develop further. Bryn, if you'd like to come in. I'm aware this is a very wide-ranging document and we're having some quite lengthy questions and answers. And we've got just under an hour left and we've done two of the 7 outcomes at this point. So if we can all keep it a little more succinct, it would be helpful.
Diolch Peter. Mae gen i ddau gwestiwn ar yr adran yma, ond just like hoffi wneud y sylw cyn cychwyn, diolch i Gaint am ateb diplomataidd iawn i'r cwestiwn cynt. Dwi'n meddwl bod o'n bwysig iawn i bawb ddeall. Mae'n gwestiwn mawr gen i, pam bod mae sôn byth ar beunydd am dewis riant. Pam yr unig dewis i gen riant mewn ysgolion yma ydy'r dewis i peidio dysgu Cymraeg. Hwna'n hollol sylfaenol wrong, achos mae o'n rhwystro pob cyfle i deall y diwylliant a cyfrwng diwylliant, rhannu diwylliant ydy iaith, a mae'n rhwystro dewis plant sydd yn medru siarad Cymraeg i ddefnyddio'r iaith, a maen nhw yn cwmni plant sydd ddim yn gallu siarad Cymraeg a Saesneg. Addysg ddwyieithog, da ni'n trafod fan hyn, does na'r un plentyn sy'n mynd i'r ysgolion dwyieithog cyfrwng Cymraeg methu siarad Saesneg hefyd, a mae'n bwysig i wneud y pwynt yn glir trosodd a throsodd, a dydy ddim yn help pan mae cynghorwyr yn codi bwganod ynglyn ag addysg Saesneg. Dydy'r dewis ar gyfer addysg Gymraeg ddim wedi bod gyda ni ers ganrif yn y sir yma. Da ni gorfod goresgyn y trafferth sydd yn ymylu ar hiliaeth yn fy nhyb i. Ta waith, i dod at y cwestiynau sydd gen i mewn golwg. Un o'n nhw lle maen nhw. Allwch chi ymhelaethu ar y trochi, y pilot trochi sy'n cael ei cynnig ar gyfer y dre newydd. Does i plant yn algylch dre newydd fydd hwn, neu os dy modd i plant o weddill Powys neu Gogledd Powys o Lia cael trafnidiaeth i'r uned trochi yma. Dwi'n cymryd mae uned trochi ydy o'n ystyr bod o'n derbyn plant o unrhyw oed, un oed cynradd neu unrhyw oed cynradd ac uwchradd i gychwyn. Hwna di'n nghwestiwn cyntaf i ysgrifennu fodlon dod ateb.
Na i ateb hwnna, Cynghorydd Bryn. Mae'r ganolfan trochi yn mynd i fod yn bailot ar gyfer disgyblion cyfnod allweddol 2, hynny yw blwyddyn 3 i blwyddyn 6 fel man cychwyn. Mi fydd yna nifer o waith gwahaniaethu yn fannu gychwyn, achos mae gennym ni enghreifftiau blant sydd yn newid o gyfrwng Saesneg, ysgolion ym Mhywys, i addysg gyfrwng Gymraeg, lle mae ganddyn nhw dipyn o'r iaith, lle mae gennym ni rhai eraill sy'n symud mewn o Loegr. O ran y dalgylch, mor eang ac sydd yn ymarferol bosib i'r plant allu teithio, achos mae rhaid nhw deithio i'r ganolfan yn foreol o'i hysgol cartref, os hoffwch chi, os dyna gair. Bydden nhw'n mynd i'w ysgol cartre ac yn cyfarfod fan i'r tacsi sy'n mynd wedyn i'r ganolfan drochi. So nhw'n mor eang, ond mae ganddo ni wrth gwrs yr darpariaeth rhithiol i gefnogi lleill hefyd ar y daith.
Ac ydy o am gyfnod o 6 wythnos neu tymor neu blwyddyn cyfan?
Da ni'n mynd i gychwyn ar ôl hanner tymor mis Hydref tan tymor y Nadolig, a da ni'n mynd i asesu fel dylech chi bob tro, monitro ac asesu, gweld beth yw cyflawniad, beth yw safonau'r disgyblion. Mae'r rhain caffael iaith yn gyflymach nag eraill, ond allwn ni wastad ddarparu ôl-yfalaeth iddyn nhw yn eu hysgolion eu hunain, neu parhau efo'r uned drochi ar ôl y Nadolig. Da ni'n mynd i asesio yn union model Ceredigion. Da ni'n mynd i weithio'n agos iawn hefo nhw sydd efo profiad yn y maes yma.
A bydden nhw'n, wel, oce, iawn, alright, so bydden nhw'n teithio'n ddyddiol am y cyfnod
5
cychwynnol
diwrnod.
ac bydd o'n lleihau wrth iddyn nhw caffael ar y iaith, ennill caff, ie, oce.
Bydden nhw'n am 5 diwrnod yr wythnos os gyfnod y wythnosau, ie.
Gwych. A'r ail gwestiwn sydd gennau, sôn am symud ysgolion dwy ffrwd ar hyd y continuum, just rhyw bras amcant gennau, bod tasau pob ysgol dwy ffrwd sydd gennym ni ar hyn o bryd yn trosglwyddo yn gyfan gwbl ddwyieithog. Fysa'n cyfrannu tua 8% o'r 14%, sef y nod ar ddiwedd y 10 mlynedd. Pa mor gyflym allith hynny ddigwydd? Faint o'r rym sydd gan yr awdurdod lleol yn y mater hynny? Nid yw'n mater o dwy'n perswad ar pob un corff llywodraethol i gychwyn y broses ac achos wel, ydych chi'n gwybod bod fi ar hast, ond ys dim reswm pam na fedra fo ddim dechrau ar gyfer pob ysgol proses ymgynghori digwydd yn ystod y flwyddyn hon neu'r flwyddyn nesaf, fel bod, achos mae'n mynd i cymryd 19 mis i 2 flynedd ar ôl i'r broses cychwyn ym mhob un o'r ysgolion dwy ffrwd yma i cyrraedd y pen draw. A faint o rym allan ni roi ar ei cyfer ein siwbron llwyddiannus? A'r sydyn eich o ddigwydd i'r cwestiwn ydy.
Ydy hwnna'n fwy strategol, Geraint?
Wy'n hapus i ddod nôl ar hwnna. Y cwestiwn fan hyn o sut mae'r cyfan ffitio gyda datblygiad staff, parodrwydd ysgol i allu wneud, allwn ni'n symud yn gyflymach na'r ysgol yn gallu wneud y shifft. Hynny yw, oedd ysgol Crybbarth mewn sefyllfa gryf fel ysgol ffrwd cyfrwng Saesneg, nid ysgol dwy ffrwd ydi. Ysgol cyfrwng Saesneg, ond gyda'r athrawon ar gael i wneud, i ddod a wneud cynnig. Felly, os ydyw momentum y sir yn amlwg, a bod y dyhead i weld ar ryw bwynt yn y dyfodol, bod yn pobl ifanc ni gyd yn amlieithog. Bydd yn ddiddorol gweld beth yw'r ymateb, ond mae ysgolion yn gallu dod i siarad â ni, gymaint â ni'n gallu mynd i siarad â nhw. Ond mae rhaid ni fod yn sicr bod modd staffio a gweld y cyfan yn ffitio at ei gilydd o ran niferoedd hefyd. Felly, a dyna sut mae'r sefyllfa ysgol Dyffryn Trannon, pasiodd y cabinet i symud honna ddoe ar hyd y continuum hwnnw. Felly mae'r cyfleoedd yno i wneud, ond ni angen gweithio hwn ar gonsensws gorau ni'n gallu tra hefyd yn neud yn siŵr bod ni'n cwrdd â anghenion dysgwyr a rieni. A wy'n deall eich bris chi, Cynghorydd Bryn, deall hynny'n iawn, ond am y tipyn o fomentum yn y cynllun yma, os fi'n gwybod nodwch chi ar y dechrau, byddwch chi'n hoffi mwy o fomentum, ond byddai'n ddiddorol gweld beth byddai ymateb Llywodraeth Cymru taswn ni'n cynnig mynd yn gyflymach na'r data sydd yma.
Ie, fel mae'n ambell i ysgol ddwy ffrwd, enghraifft efo pennaeth i Gymraeg wrach, neu does dim byd yn cymell nhw i symud o gwbl o'r sefyllfa nag oes, nad yw'r broblem. So fe all byth ddigwydd yn concern fawr.
Okay, Bryn, I'm going to draw this one to a close. I think just to sum up the feelings on this one, we seem to recognise that this is a step forward in terms of ambition, but in terms of the document itself and moving forward, I think the committee are reflecting that there needs to be a little bit more clarity around how these numbers are going to be achieved. We've got a lot of solid narrative of where our Welsh speakers are at the moment and where they are, but there isn't quite the clarity in how we are going to get to the outcome that we want, how things are going to be achieved effectively into the future. and where that is going to be achieved. We're saying we're identifying the areas where there is no provision, but it lacks a little in terms of the ambition about how we're going to do it. And then finally, taking on board Bryn's point, we seem to have realistic targets here, but we don't seem to have stretch targets. So perhaps it might be nice to see this is what we think we can achieve, but this is more of a stretch if at this point we've got to this point. So I don't know how people feel about that as a summary of this section, but I think it covers it fairly well. Geraint, you want to come back on that quickly, and then we'll move on to transition.
If I could, Councillor Pete. The document identifies areas where there is no provision at the moment, where the ambition to have provision is there, and then it identifies areas where there is provision, but we need to see it expanded. We need to be careful not to go beyond that, because prejudging any proposal around individual schools would actually cause difficulty in themselves. So we've got to be careful not to say school X, we would like to see that change in medium of instruction over a period of time, and therefore there is care here. The other issue is that this will be a plan that will run from next year for a decade, and there could well be a different council administration as you know, taking this plan on from day one, and therefore what we as officers are doing is presenting a document that hopefully has the merit of credibility about it, but has a clarity of purpose as well, and we would hope that the council as a whole can pull behind it, whoever the administration is, because it's the ambition is to allow our young people to have opportunities that currently elude most of them, so the vast majority of them. So we need to be mindful of that as well. Therefore, we're working with the parameters that Welsh Government have given us. You're asking the question, is there enough stretch? Well, it's the top end of what Welsh Government have laid out as what they think are broadly reasonable developments for different parts of Wales. And I think it's quite exciting, actually. The Scrutiny thinks the more stretch would be beneficial. We may need a conversation back in the team to see what that might mean and what the options might be.
In which case, I do take on board your points, and I think maybe they are points that we want to reflect in the scrutiny report, so that as the plan is moved forward and implemented, they are comments from scrutiny that whoever is implementing it needs to be aware of and take on board in their planning of the implementation, perhaps, rather than the actual production of the plan. I'm going to move on to transition pretty much immediately, because as we've already had identified, we have got quite a lot of leakage, particularly primary to secondary. Very quickly, if you have any comments on how you are planning to address that, and what your targets are in terms of reducing that leakage. And then Margaret, I think you've got your hand up. If this is around this topic, we'll go straight to you afterwards.
Okay, I'll turn to Hugh Foster Evans.
Diolch Geraint. Diolch yn fawr. Diolch Cadeirydd. A diolch i chi gyd am y cyfle gen i hefyd i gael cyfrannu i un o'r dogfennau strategol mwyaf pwysig sydd gan unrhyw awdurdod lleol. Dwi wedi gweithio'n agos efo awdurdodau arbennig yn Wrecsam dros y blynyddoedd yn creu cynlluniau strategol. So dwi'n falch o gael y cyfle i allu cyfrannu rhywfaint yn fan hyn heddiw, ac yn falch o bod yn rhan o'r drafodaeth. Mae deilliant 3, fel sydd wedi cael ei gyfeirio ato fel barod, yn sôn am sicrhau bod plant sydd wedi bod yn y sector Cymraeg yn gynharach yn ei gyrfa yn gallu parhau i wellau sgiliau Cymraeg pan maen nhw'n symud o un cyfnod addysg i'r llall. Hynny ydy, mae angen i'r deilliant yma adeiladu ar gynnydd cyfnodau blaenorol, a lle'n bosibl hefyd gyrru hynny ymhellach. So mae rhaid i ni wneud yn siŵr bod ni'n lleihau y golled sydd wedi cael ei chyfeirio ati'n barod, a cymryd unrhyw gyfleoedd y gallai godi wedyn yn y cyfnodau nesaf i sicrhau bod y gwelliant hwnnw yn digwydd. Fyddwch chi'n gwybod, os ni'n sôn yn benodol am drosglwyddo cynradd uwchradd, lle mae'r broblem fwyaf yn codi ym Mhywys. A mae yna beth data da ni wedi dderbyn yn ystod y dyddiau dwytha, mae mi nath Geraint gyfeirio atyn nhw. Mae'r deilliant ar y nodiadau o fewn y papur da chi wedi cael yn sôn bod y gyfradd trosglwyddo yn amrywio dipyn ar draws Powys. Mae fedrai gadarnhau fe chi rwan bod y niferoedd sydd ar goll yn y tabl yna, y niferoedd oedd yn gallu cael darpariaeth gyfrwng Cymraeg ym mlwyddyn 6-2020, y niferoedd y fanna oedd 226, 226 yn ôl plasg 2020. Erbyn y flwyddyn wedyn, y rhai oedd wedi parhau i flwyddyn 7 i barhau gael addysg gyfrwng Cymraeg yn 187. Mae hwnna'n gyfradd trosglwyddo o 82.7% ac yn ostyngiad o bron 1 allan o bob 5 yn ostyngiad o bron i 40 o ddisgyblion dros y cyfnod hwnnw. Mae'r ffigwr ar gyfer plasg 2021 blwyddyn 6 hefyd ar gael. Hwnnw ydy 215, so mae o chydig yn is nag oedd o'r flwyddyn cynt, ond yn amlwg eto, dydy'r ffigwr ar gyfer plasg 2022 ddim ar gael eto. So mae gynnon ni yn fan yna'n amlwg her enfawr i ymateb i'r ffaith bod ni yn colli y cynnydd da ni wedi wneud yn barod. Rwan, mae'r y ddogfen yn mynd ymlaen i egluro nifer o gamau da ni angen i cymryd, a mae hynny'n cynnwys newid a gwella y system drosglwyddo rhwng ysgolion a sicrhau bod yna gynlluniau trosglwyddo penodol ar gyfer blwyddyn 5 i 8 ar draws y cyfnod trosglwyddo holl bwysig na i sicrhau yn benodol lle mae darpariaeth gyfrwng Cymraeg yn y cwestiwn bod yna ni gynlluniau penodol yn ei lle ar gyfer heini. A mae yna fwy o fanylion am hynny, na ddim gwastraffu amser jyst yn mynd trwy beth sydd yn y ddogfen ar hyn o bryd. Felly, lle da ni'n bwriadu bod felly o fewn 5 mlynedd cynta'r cynllun a sut da ni'n bwriadu bod yna. Ac yn amlwg mae hwn yn ddibynnol iawn wrth gwrs ar y cynnydd sydd wedi cael ei drafod yn barod yn gynharach yn y ddogfen. So os da ni ddim yn uchelgeisio lawr yn y gwylod, da ni angen codi hwnnw, a mae hwnnw wedyn wrth gwrs yn cael chwedl y Saes knock-on effect wedyn yn dydio ar fan hyn. So felly oedd erbyn bod ni'n 82.7% ar hyn o bryd, ar dudalen 27 yn eich becyn, ni welwch chi fanna wedyn bod yna gyfeiriad ar erbyn 2027, so fewn y 5 mlynedd cyntaf yn lle da ni'n bwriadu bod. Rwan yn ddelfrydol, mi fyswn ni'n hoffi gweld hwnna yn 100% am y resymau sydd wedi cael eu trafod yn fan hyn heddiw, ddylai bod ni'n colli neb. Yn ymarferol, a mi ddau atri o'r ffigurau hynny, dwi'n bwriadu cynnig yn y munud, efallai fe rhaid i ni addasu hwnna rhywfaint. So wedyn, mi welwch chi ddarpariaeth o fan yna ynglyn â sicrhau bod yna drefniadau cadarn yn digwydd rhwng y cylchoedd ar ysgolion cynradd, sicrhau bod pob plentyn ym mhob dosbarth cyfrwng Cymraeg blwyddyn 5-6 yn rhan o'r raglen trawsnewid benodol efo darpariaeth ddwyieithog cyfrwng Cymraeg mewn ysgol uwchradd benodol, bod hwnnw yn glir yn ei le a'r manylion pellach y fanna. Bod yna awdys blynyddol wedyn yn cael ei gynnig i sicrhau bod ni'n gwybod yn union beth sy'n digwydd yn y cyfamser hefyd. Mae yna ormod o golli amser y fan hyn, lle mae plant yn syrthio allan o'r system heb bod wedi adnabod y broblem sydd gynnon ni. Mae yna drafodaeth wedi bod o gwmpas datblygu staff. Mae o'n heriol i staff yn y cyngor sydd yn cael galwadau gan rhieni neu rhieni sydd yn meddwl am yrru plant i addysg Gymraeg. Falle bod hwnna'n sicr i hynny, y staff hwnna'n sicr i hynny, mae angen datblygu'r bobl yna i fod yn gwbl hyderus i ymateb mewn ffordd gadarnhaol i'r rhieni sydd yn cynyddu hyder y rhieni hynny i yrru plant i gyfrwng Cymraeg. A hefyd fe welwch chi fanna, mae ni hefyd wneud yn fawr o'r cyfle sy'n dod yn ffordd ni yn yr ymgynghoriad sydd ar y gweill ar hyn o bryd gan Lywodraeth Cymru o ran categoreiddio ysgolion a'r is-gategoria hefyd sydd yn rhan o hynny mwyn helpu ni symud ysgolion o un categori i'r llall. Fe ddylwn ni bwysleisio bod y ffigwr yna nes i roed i chi rwan, sef yr 83%, mae hwnna yn barod yn cymryd i ystyried bod yna lot o'n plant ni yn mynd i ysgol gyfun Gymraeg ysgol Aberang a Seth Nefo Tarbot. Mae llwyddiant mawr ysgol Dyffryn Glowyr, mae hwnnw'n rhan ohono fo. Di'r golled ddim yn digwydd yn fan honno. Mae gennym ni hefyd ambell i blentyn sydd yn symud allan o'r ardal a da ni wedi tracio rhain ofalus os ydyn nhw'n mynd i ysgolion fel Ysgol Penwedig neu Ysgol Gyfun Gŵyr, da ni wedi gallu cael gafel yn rheini. So mae'r ffigwr yna, yr 83%, mae'r agos gywir a sydd yn bosibl. Wedyn mae gynnon ni'r cwestiwn wedyn I gloi, Mr Cadeirydd, jyst ar hon gen I wedyn, o ran y targedau wedyn dros y 10 mlynedd sydd yn mynd drosodd I 2032. Rwan, te fel soniodd Geraint ar y dechrau, dwi'n meddwl bod hwn yn gyfle I ni fel awdurdod roed stamp uchelgeisiol ar y patrwm yma. Os edrychwch chi ar y ffigurau nath Delyth gyfeiriad nhw'n gynharach ar gyfer deilliant 2, a'r cynnydd na 40%. Os ydy hwnnw yn trosglwyddo drosodd wedyn I gyfnod allweddol 3 dros y cyfnod, yna da ni angen sicrhau bod ni'n dal yn gafel yn y plant yna I gyd, a dwi'n awgrymu hefyd, efo cynllun trochi, fel na Delyth wedi sôn amdano fo, effeithiol rhwng blwyddyn 6 a 7, bod modd ychwanegu at y ffigwr hwnnw. Felly mi fyswn ni'n awgrymu erbyn 2032 y dylai bod yn anelu a drosglwyddiad o 105%. Hynny ydi bod ni'n gweld cynnydd ar ben yr hyn sydd yn barod yn y system drwy gyfundrefn drochi, bod ni'n gallu cynyddu hwnna ymhellach, a di hwnna ddim yn anghyffredin gyda llaw mewn rhai awdurdodau eraill. Dwi wedyn edrych ar be fydda'r ffigurau yn aniolygu ar gyrraedd hynny o'r 83% rydyn ni arno fo ar hyn o bryd yn edrych dros y cyfnod, a dwi'n hapus I rannu y ffigurau hynny efo chi, ond maen nhw'n awgrymu, os ydym ni wedi ddangos cynnydd cyson ar hyd yr adeg, yna o fewn y 5 mlynedd, mi ddod bod ni wedi symud o 83% I fyny I oddeutu 90%. Sy'n braf gallu wneud o'n gynt na hynny, ond er oedd yr ymarferol dda ni wedi drafod, efallai bod hwnnw yn gynllun mwy realistig. Ymddeiriadau eto bod y ffigurau ddim wedi bod ar gael I neb ohono ni tan y deuddeg diwethaf yma, ond yn amlwg mi fydd o'n y ddogfen derfynol fydd yn mynd ger bron, ac hapus I drosglwyddo nôl I chi, Mr Cadeirydd, diolch yn fawr.
Thank you very much for that, Hugh. I think my first question, while others think about things, has to be, I'm assuming you've done some exit interviews with pupils that are not going into Welsh medium secondary education. What are the main reasons why they aren't, and how do you plan to address those within the plan?
Thank you for the question, Chair. Personally, no, I haven't been involved with that, but I'm aware that the officers are working with schools, particularly those schools where there are issues in terms of drop-off. We identified all sorts of issues, not least of which the distance that some children need to travel to secondary provision, which is far from their area. Others may feel that the provision isn't what they want. They're not looking for a bilingual dual stream provision. They're looking for a different kind of provision, and so they opt elsewhere. And there are issues of that nature, as I understand it. I'm not part of that debate exactly myself, but those are the issues as I understand it. Maybe Geraint and Delyth and others can add to that.
Geraint, Delyth, do you have any comment?
Just to say, when we were looking at holding consultations about the transformation process prior to bringing forward the 2020 transformation strategy, we held quite a lot of learner voice opportunities there, and some did say that there's not a great deal of choice in the secondary, and therefore they were finding it quite difficult to maintain their bilingual skills. But in the main here, we're talking about there is an issue which will come in the next section, which he will present, which is around what are the opportunities available for progression from primary right through to the end of school. And that data might actually help unlock some of the narrative, but not all of it. It's a complex web. And there may be parents as well who think that if they've had Welsh in primary, then it sets them up for life. Unfortunately, it doesn't work like that in terms of being able to exercise professional bilingualism. It requires more than that, but that may be part of a narrative as well. But when he runs through the Key Stage 4 figures, what's available in English medium and in Welsh medium in the same school, I think there may be some issues there that will help unlock some of this.
I think that's helpful, and I'm going to move us after Bryn's commented, I'm going to move us onto the fourth outcome. But I think for Wyn's benefit and our observations, I think some narrative around why pupils are, as it were, dropping out would be helpful in the document to give confidence that we understand the reasons, and therefore there is more credibility to the figures that we are saying that we're going to achieve. Because at the moment, we know the only thing that we have solid in front of us is that 20% are dropping out, and we're going to reduce that, but no confidence that we know why they're dropping out, and therefore that we are putting in the right measures to reduce that. So again, unless colleagues disagree, that would be an observation that I would be looking to share with Cabinet.
Could I come back quickly on that, Chair?
Yeah.
Just to say, I mean, as we've said right at the beginning, this is a starter document. What actually becomes our WESP for final approval will be after we will have had a consultation. And it might be that it'd be wise in the consultation for us to seek out those who were part of the dropout and actually ascertain why that happened and what might have been helpful to avoid it. So whilst it might not appear in the document that goes to consultation, I think it's a legitimate suggestion that we should know by the time we come forward with the firm document.
I thought it was my job to put the recommendations for scrutiny, not yours, but I'm quite happy to ask Wyn to reflect what you've said, because I couldn't have put a better suggestion forward. So thank you for that, Geraint.
Thank you.
Bryn, if you have something on outcomes, and if you want on this one, and if it is something that stretches into outcome 4, by all means, merge your question on outcome 4 with it.
Iawn, wel mae yna dipyn bach o gorlapio, ond dwi'n gobeithio cadw'r hawl I ofyn cwestiwn yn adran 4 hefyd. Ond y cwestiwn sgynna I ar data plasg sy'n cael ei ddefnyddio yn aml iawn yn y ddogfen yma, ac mae'n cyfeirio at plant sydd yn astudio Cymraeg iaith gyntaf, y wybodaeth yna yn dod trwedd. Dwi'n gwybod byddech chi'n ymholi ar ysgolion, ond fysa yn awgrymu wrach bod yna, pan ydych chi yn trio ffindio allan be di profiad, bod yna ymholiad yn mynd sydd yn uniongyrchol I cartrefi ac i'r plant, achos mae yna tueddiad mewn rhai ysgolion ni yn Powys I orddwaid ar hyn maen nhw'n darparu mwy ar lefel dymunol yn hytrach na real. Os gael roi o fel hynny. Mae yna ambell I ystadegyn yn dod trwedd sydd yn reit anodd I gredu ar lawr gwlad. So, os na modd I ymholiad o be di profiadau plant o pa wersi sydd yn cael trwy gyfrwng Gymraeg mynd yn uniongyrchol I gartrefi. Achos mae mwy nag un achos mae yna athro Cymraeg o flaen dosbarth Cymraeg yn weithiau yn defnyddio'r Saesneg yn unig, a tro arall yn siarad Cymraeg ond yr adnoddau gyd yn Saesneg. A dio ddim yn anghyffredin yn anffodus. So mae eisiau bod yn ymwybodol o hynny wrth wneud yr arolwg os yn bosib ysgwrch yna.
I think just to summarise that, I think what Hugh, I think what Bryn is asking for is the statement that something is provided through the medium of Welsh actually provided through the medium of Welsh in its entirety, or is it actually a mixture of English and Welsh resources where perhaps the teacher is speaking in Welsh but the books may be in English? So I think it's a concern that's been reflected to me by others that there might not be quite as much genuine Welsh delivery of the curriculum as it appears on paper. When Bryn's nodding, so I think I've summarised.
Yeah, it's a very fair point. I think we need to include that within the consultation so everybody gets a chance to say that. One of the things we do try to do very closely, when I get on to outcome 4 shortly, is to look at the data that comes back from the examination entries, which looks at exactly what language the children have sat their examination in. And that is quite often a much better reflection than what the schools may or may not describe the provision as being. Because you can have a situation, as Bryn says, where the classes may end up in being mixed language, but for all sorts of reasons, then that can, for reasons people will understand, switch towards the English, resulting in learners who would otherwise possibly want to do their qualifications with the medium of Welsh, slipping into English. And when we get to some of the data on page 31 shortly, that I think quite underlines that very clearly. So we've got a fair handle on an element of that, but I take the point on board as well that we can have more information.
Thank you for that. And Bryn's happy. So Hugh, if you briefly would like to draw our attentions to things in outcome 4, and then I'll open it up to questions because I know of a couple on this one.
Okay.
Yeah, Jake, you're one.
Okay, diolch yn fawr. Na i wneud hwn mor sydyn ag y gallai. So deilliant 4 yn sôn am gynyddu nifer y dysgwyr sydd yn cael eu hasesu ar gyfer cymwysterau yn y Gymraeg fel pwnc, ac wrth gwrs hefyd mewn pynciau eraill trwy gyfrwng y Gymraeg. Mae gennych chi wybodaeth o'ch blaen chi fan yn dangos sut mae nifer disgyblion cyfrwng Cymraeg a disgyblion cyfrwng Saesneg wedi dosbarthu rhwng yr ysgolion uwchradd dwy ffrwd fel y Gymanw ar hyn o bryd. A mae o'n eitha clir. Mae yna hyd at Machynlleth 63% o'r plant yn y ffrwd Gymraeg. Mae yma isel a 5% wedyn yn Aberhonddu. A mae y sefyllfaoedd gwahanol yn dod â heriau arbennig i'r ysgolion hynny. O ran y ddarpariaeth cyfrwng Cymraeg wedyn, mi welwch chi yr rhestr yna sydd yn dangos nifer y pynciau yng nghyfnod allweddol 4, so plant oed 40, 15 ac 11 oed sy'n cael ei astudio trwy gyfrwng Gymraeg, ddim yn cynnwys Cymraeg fel pwnc, ond dyma'r pynciau eraill sy'n cael ei dysgu trwy gyfrwng Gymraeg. Rhain ni'n amrywio o 1 yn Aberhonddu i 22 ym Mro Hyddgen. Mae ffigurau cyfrwng Saesneg wedi dod i law i mi fan hyn o rannu'r rhain efo chi, so os ai trwyddyn nhw'n ei trefn. So dyma'r pynciau cyfrwng Saesneg yn Rhondda 4. Aberhonddu 22, Caerenion 20, Llanidloes 29, Mro Hyddgen 22, Calon Cymru 27 a Llanfyllin 25. So mi welwch chi'n syth yn fanna rwan, mae yna elfen o hyn yn mynd yn ôl i'r cwestiwn flaenorol. Os ydych chi'n riant mewn ysgol gynradd Gymraeg, a mae'ch plentyn chi'n trosglwyddo i'r cyfnod uwchradd, ydych chi'n gweld yn syth yn fanna, mae yna her yn amrediad y dewisiadau sydd ar gael i'r plentyn yn nifer fawr o'r ysgolion yma, ac mewn rhai cyd-destynau, mae'r ffrwd Gymraeg yn brin iawn o ran i ddarpariaeth yng nghyfnod allweddol 4. So mae hwnna'n rhannol gysylltiedig â'r hyn da ni wedi glywed o'r blaen. A mi welwch chi hefyd ar draws y dudalen wedyn, a rhaid cymryd llaw yn hir iawn ar hyn rwan, ond mi welwch chi'n fan yna hefyd, hyd yn oes ydy'r plant wedi astudio Cymraeg fel iaith gyntaf, mi welwch chi bod yna ostyngiad sylweddol i lawr i prin 19% sydd wedyn wedi cwblhau 8 neu fwy o gymwysterau eraill trwy gyfrwng Cymraeg. A mae'r ffigurau yna yn amrywio hefyd ar draws yr ysgolion. A mae hwn yn adlewyrchiad o hyn sydd wedi bod yn y ddogfennaeth, sydd wedi bod yn y strategaeth gyfrwng Cymraeg, sydd wedi bod yn y strategaeth trawsnewid, yn pwysleisio yr heriau sydd yna i gynnal ysgolion dwy ffrwd llwyddiannus a pam bod polisi yr awdurdod bellach ar hyn ydi o. Ac wedyn wrth gwrs mae gynnwch chi fel fyddwch chi'n disgwyl o fewn hwn disgrifiad o'r sefyllfa bositif iawn ym Mro Hyddgen. Mae'n disgrifio'r sefyllfa sydd yn digwydd y bwriadau o ran Llanfair Caerenion a'r disgwyliadau'r awdurdod o gyrffodraethol ysgol bob oed yn fan honno. A wedyn y cynlluniau hefyd wrth gwrs ar gyfer ysgol cyfrwng Cymraeg sydd yn rhan o'r cynigion sydd i ddod ger bron yn Llanfair y Muallt. Dwi wedi trafod o'r blaen efo'r grŵp yma dipyn ynglyn â'r darpariaeth ôl 16, mi welwch chi wedyn Mae'r darpariaeth yn dirywio'n hynod allweddol 4, mae'n dirywio'n bellach eto erbyn cyfnod allweddol 5 ar 6 dosbarth. Gymaint felly, fel mewn rhai o'r ysgolion cyfrwng Cymraeg, ysgolion dwyieithog, does yna ddim darpariaeth cyfrwng Cymraeg o gwbl mewn rhai ohonyn nhw, ac wrth gwrs mae hwnna yn darged i gynyddu hwnna yn flynyddol dros y cyfnod ac erbyn bydd yr ysgolion cyfrwng Cymraeg mae wedi sefydlu, yn wrth gwrs mi fydd yna darpariaeth lawn cyfrwng Cymraeg yn chweched dosbarth yn fan honno hefyd. Dwi'n ymwybodol bod o'r amser yn bryn, Mr Cadeirydd, so na i adael o fanna a wedyn ni symud i gwestiynau. Diolch yn fawr.
Thanks, Hugh. Councillor Jake.
Right, I think I'm live. I'm afraid I heard very little of that translation. It seems still to be a problem for me, at least. But I have read the report, and I just have a couple of questions. I'll ask one now, and perhaps I'll be able to come back to post 16 afterwards. I mean, obviously, as we go through the learning journey, the uncertainties increase, and you've made that very clear. The inequalities in accessing full Welsh medium by the time you get to this stage is fully recognised in the report. There are major challenges which you have identified, and I think that is fair. And then if I summarise it effectively, what you're saying is that we're putting 3 eggs into the basket, really. One is the new all-age provision at Llanfair Crynion. The other is the change in language at Machynlleth, and the third is the new Welsh medium school in Builth. Now, all of these have a range of uncertainties, which I think, in fairness, you probably identified, although I suspect that, for instance, in terms of the new school in Builth, I certainly don't have information about feeder schools and the dual streams, etc., and quite how that will work yet, because we're having to unpick something before we put it back together. And I fully appreciate that this West plan goes hand in hand with the transformation plan, but I am a little bit nervous about us being in a position to sign off on this with any degree of uncertainty because of the lack of clarity about deliverability on any of these which are tied into that transformation. So I don't know how you give me that certainty, but I'd like to be further encouraged by what you're able to say.
Okay, thank you for that, and thank you for recognising the challenges that are involved here. I think, and Geraint may want to come back at this from a strategic perspective in the council, but there is absolutely no way we tackle this particular outcome unless we get to grips with the challenges that have been highlighted around the lack of Welsh medium secondary provision within the authority, and that in itself is a challenge around where, when, and how that is going to be developed. We've addressed issues around numbers, whether or not there are sufficient numbers, various places for these things to happen. But if I were a parent faced with deciding to send my child to a school where there were 2, 3, 4, 5 subjects, and that's all available through the medium of Welsh, I would be challenged to make a positive decision. So I think there's an issue here of actually stating within this West, which is a strategy document, goes to Welsh Government to state, as it is within the strategy, this is what our ambition is. But I think we've got to recognise, yes, there are practical challenges, but unless we put it in here, as far as I can see, unless we have it in here, we've got no chance of delivering. Geraint, is that fair?
Yeah, I think what Councillor Jake is raising here is something we need to take a look at, because essentially what we're laying out here is possibilities. We need to be careful about how that plays out, but we currently don't really address the issue of learner entitlement across swathes of the authority when it comes to secondary provision. It's not uniform, and it is inconsistent, which is part of the problem that we're having to address. So I think there are suggestions here about the sorts of things that would help move it forward. The questions then around, we have chicken and egg situations then, like we did earlier on, talking about how do you introduce a Welsh medium nursery in an area where there isn't a Welsh medium primary. And likewise, how would you have a primary without first having a nursery? We've got chicken and egg again around secondary provision. Because the expectations have been limited to what they are, and we need to break out of that. I think this might be worth us taking a look at how this is worded, because it is a consultation document, and we just need to ensure that whilst we do want to identify areas that may help us resolve this, we also need to be open to how we get there. There are different routes that we need to take, but whichever one it is, it needs a bit of courage. But I think it's worth going back to the team and having a look at this to see how we've specified it.
I think that's an important point, Geraint, and Jake may want to come back, but without going into detailed numbers, looking at that central Powys area, there is a distinct challenge there in terms of creating a viable solution at day one, and even moving forward, looking at the numbers within the catchment and transfers, producing a viable solution unless we grow the numbers of pupils that are taking primary through the medium of Welsh in the first phase of the programme. So I think it's a very tricky area to look at, and the language used around there is a very significant one, because that whole catchment is a problematic one, because essentially you've got two high schools in an area with very few pupils.
Yeah, and I think we need, sorry to butt in there, Councillor Pete, I think we also need to see our Welsh medium secondaries as a network. The notion of, whilst they may have governance that are unique and localized, we do need to see very, very active networking of provision, like we've got post-16 in English and in Welsh across the ESCOL project and other things that are now coming on stream. I think we have to build in an acceptance that development at secondary Welsh needs to be, whatever institutions are offering it, they need to be codependent, not independent of each other, so that we maximize high quality teaching, effective resources, even if it is digitized sometimes. I think we need to have a good look at this one.
Yeah, I think there is a lot more work that is needed around the secondary sector, and I don't think the I don't think this document quite addresses just how big a challenge that is. And I think at times it presents a vision that may come off the rails when you start to come across hard facts and figures. That would be my nervousness of it at this stage. And as we've said so many times, the consultation needs to tease out a lot of questions and a lot of challenges, and identify whether there is the latent demand within some of these areas to actually make some of our ambitions achievable within this 10-year window, rather than setting ourselves up to fail.
Pete, you did just say I might just come back, but I mean I appreciate the difficulties here. Of course I do, and I think that possibly behind the scenes, and I know Geraint was being very careful about going away and choosing words carefully, but I think we probably need to, around some of these projects, start running some hypothetical scenarios. I think it is more complicated than perhaps in one of the earlier outcomes, where you might have a table of ambition and a sort of things that you might hope to achieve. I think it's more complex than that, but I would certainly like behind the scene conversations in those clusters that you're talking around with the feeder primaries, etc., around Welsh language provision, to ensure that we do have the numbers that follow through. Because if we were to put the chicken first and make built provision and the egg hasn't been laid, sorry, this is getting a bit tenuous now, then all of a sudden there will be a very difficult numbers discussion, and financial crisis will follow. So I think perhaps some assurance about how that dialogue might take place offline from this, behind the scenes with the schools, might be something around the wording that you might want to consider.
Can I come back on that, Chair? I think what's really important here is we are, because of the situation we're in, and we're off the pace really in terms of the wider Wales setting, what we're being asked to do is set an ambition. This is the opening salvo document to say, if you happen to live in an area X, you should have an entitlement to something. Now, if we say anything less than that, then we're really dishonouring those young people who are growing through the system, who are entitled to it, based on any principle of equalities and expectation. However, this is incomplete. This document is a 10-year kickstart to say this is where we would like to be. We'll be held to account as an authority against the figures that we have. However, you know, with anything like this, you can end up outstripping your expectations in one part and under firing in another part. But collectively, we've got to try and move this agenda forward in all parts of Powys, because ultimately, being brought up in one area, not being able to acquire bilingual skills seems hugely unfair when it can happen elsewhere. So mindful of what you're saying, Councillor Jake, and we do have work to do behind the scenes, but it may not be prior to the adoption of a document. But we may need to check the wording around this, and then we say, right, how do we get there? Because if this process that Welsh Government is putting in place works, there'll be a further 10-year plan coming at some point towards the end of the decade, and then you grow from there. But they've already learned from the short-term plans that people have had previously that it needs a longer run at it. But the longer the run, the more speculative the end of the journey, and we just need to be able to accommodate that spirit, I think, sometimes.
Thank you for that, Geraint. Emma, I'm assuming you want to come in from a transformation perspective.
Yes, please, Chair. Thanks, Councillor Jake. The complexities and the challenges that you've articulated are absolutely the ones that we're grappling with currently. And there has been a commitment given by the Cabinet, and we have already started work to look at extensive engagement, particularly in the south, mid and south of the county, in respect of the Welsh medium provision. Because the challenge is there in terms of the numbers and also the location. And so we want to make sure that we do that extensive engagement with families, parents, as an example, to help inform some of the proposals that you're referring to in the south and the mid in particular. I'm referring because you made reference to Llandrindod and Bilth. We did go, just for scrutiny, so you're aware, we did go out to tender. We were bringing in some additional resource for that, but unfortunately we've not been successful. So we're having to review that because of the capacity as well within our own team to be able to deliver on the enormous agenda that we have ahead of us. And it's really important that we get this right. There is no easy solution, but we've got to make a start somewhere, and it's just finding the most logical way forward in terms of that scenario planning that you referred to. So I just wanted to give a commitment. We're on the same page in terms of those challenges, and I wanted to work through them, but there is no easy answer, and there's no one answer. I think it's just working that through collectively to see how we get the best way forward. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you for that, Emma. I'm aware that we are 5 minutes short of our time, and I haven't been able to keep us on time, and I feared I wouldn't because of the breadth of the areas we needed to cover. Could I check, are officers able to stay a bit longer, or have you got meetings you've got to go to at the end?
I've got to be at a 4:15 meeting that I can't avoid. It involves small children, and I'm responsible for them, I'm afraid.
I will
So
focus on getting us through to that point. I know that the remaining 3 sections, workforce, we've already touched on a little bit, and ALM we've talked about in quite some detail when we've looked to Prohufkin. So I think that will help us move those forward more expediently. So, Bryn, can you finish us off on this particular section?
Yeah. Yeah, thanks. Nes I rhybuddio cynt am ysgolion uwchradd yn estyn y gwirionedd falle i wneud pethau edrych yn well na hynny. Gai tynnu sylw at achos fan hyn, dyma'r swyddog Cyngor Sir Powys wedi gwneud rhywbeth tebyg. Mae'r paragraff cyntaf ar tudalen 31 yn awgrymu positifrwydd mewn sefyllfa lle nad oes, os na i dyfynnu oddi wrtho fo. In 2020-2021, KS4 learners that studied Welsh as a first language across the 60 all-stream secondary and all through schools across the local authority, 98.6% successfully completed other level 2 qualifications through the medium of Welsh. Well, that sounds like an incredibly positive statistic, a massive success. But the reality is that only 20% of all those who are first language Welsh speakers actually managed to complete the GCSEs more or less entirely through the medium of Welsh. Well, 20% of 20% is 4% of Welsh speakers. And I think a more appropriate paragraph in that section would be only 4% of Powys learners completed 8 or 9 GCSEs through the medium of Welsh, and that is only 20% of the 20% who could have had the opportunity, had they been given the opportunity to follow the GCs through the medium of Welsh. I think that's an effort to highlight something which as a positive, which is it just isn't. And the other question is a massive concern about the arrangements for Welsh medium secondary school in North Powys in particular. It seems to me that that all of North Powys is waiting on the decision of a few governors in one locality on the future of the Welsh medium provision for all of North Powys, and that's fundamentally undemocratic. It says it's a possibility that a Welsh medium school, where it says Llanfair Cerenion here, and might happen, and then later on all other developments assume that happens. Well, that is. I mean, you know my views on this. It prevents development of Welsh medium education at secondary level in North Powys because it's inaccessible for most of the children, where the English medium school on their doorstep is going to attract those children. Already there are probably sufficient numbers in the Severn Valley, Upper Severn Valley, to make a viable option starting within the next couple of years. The proposed option here is going to take 12 years to work through, and it doesn't serve the needs of most of North Powys. That really needs to be gone over in more detail, and widen the consultation has to be wider than just the single school under consideration. I'd appreciate your responses to those remarks.
I think it's a pertinent point, because this is a variation from our existing WESP, where the Severn Valley was identified as the focal point for developing Welsh medium education in the north. So yeah, before you answer that though, Councillor Jake had a question around post 16. If he asks that, and then perhaps you can take the two questions together to save a bit of time.
Oh, thanks there. Yes, my question really was around the fact that, you know, the report suggests, the key thing that I read about this in the report is we have a lot of leakage of pupils and money across the border out of Powys, and the ideal would be to keep that money in Powys schools within sixth forms. To me, whilst there's been a comprehensive review, which I really don't feel I've been part of, which includes the tertiary sector, Neath Port Talbot College, I would have thought a review which was in the interest of pupils and not just the coffers of sixth form schools would be looking to ensure that we had quality sixth form education in Powys across the board, bearing in mind a number of learners going on post-16 will not be going on to do A-levels. They'll be going back into college by choice and doing English and maths, which are the required subjects if they've failed them previously, along with hairdressing or bricklaying or whatever they're doing in those. And I thought that this whole section was very, very thinly and poorly drafted, with very little regard to that sector at all. Little mention, little regard, and it sounded like we're just trying to keep the money in Powys. And actually, there's a much. I don't think you're doing a. I think you're doing a disservice to those youngsters that you've excluded from that discussion.
Councillor Lucy in the chat has used the same word, woolly, in terms of the lack of clear plans for improving and increasing post-16 provision through the medium of Welsh.
Sorry, Gareth, you go first.
Well, he would come in after me. Just say, Councillor Jake, where the local authority has jurisdiction is over schools. You're right to say we've been looking at the issue of leakage across the border. He will come in on that because there's been a significant piece of work around that. I'm fully in agreement with you that the provision that we need is far broader than what schools are able to provide, and we're not looking for schools to pretend that they're FE colleges or work-based learning providers. That would be wholly unacceptable. And there's been a record across Wales and beyond Wales of schools attempting to run courses and make provision that they're really ill-equipped to do, just in order to keep the numbers up. Well, that isn't okay, but we're reliant on our partners for the other areas of work. In Welsh medium or English medium, language isn't the issue at that point. The establishing of the Regional Skills Partnership does need to get some pace into this. They are charged, for the first time, we have a Mid-Wales body which does straddle Ceredigion and ourselves. We have a bespoke Mid-Wales body that is charged with ensuring that the economy has the right skills, and that needs to start from school-age learners. So the fact that they're school age doesn't mean that it ought to be entirely a school provision. We've got some development to do here, and we are, just as we have said at the beginning, that we're behind the curve with provision in Welsh in Powys. We're also behind the curve in terms of the provision of vocational education and work-based learning. There is provision, but it's nowhere near as accessible as one would hope it would be, and the variety is not very strong either for our learners. So that's a major piece of work, and that's for the Regional Skills Partnership to identify that and to have bilingualism as one of the strands that they need actually to ensure that there are skilled people in different workplaces who are able to exercise bilingual skills. So the point's clearly made. I think this is, in terms of what this says about provision, it is around what we can have a measure of control over, which is schools. And there is a governance arrangement that Hugh has brokered with the head teacher community and beyond to try and change the school's agenda. But there's a bigger challenge than that.
Hugh, I think you're coming in quickly, and then I'm going to summarise and draw this section to a close.
Yeah, just quickly to thank Councillor Jake for the comments. I don't disagree, having read this, that the element around post-16 in this it needs beefing up. But I would want to emphasise exactly the point that Geraint has made there The issue is not around where the provision is or where pupils are going. It is around getting that learner entitlement for post-16 learners established and delivered, be it in English medium, be it in Welsh medium, be it those academic courses, be it vocational courses, wherever they want to go. And I want to emphasise that very, very strongly. This has all been a learner-centred, learner entitlement-centred review as far as the post-16 elements is concerned. And I do accept fully that it is not reflected well in this document this afternoon.
Can you respond to the points I made before Jake's questions, please?
Good point, Bryn. The point around the
decision making on North Powys Welsh Medium's secondary school provision.
Geraint, Bryn's comment around the fact that it seems to be stalled around the decisions around what's happening in one high school.
Well, there's an active dialogue going on there to try and ensure that at pace we have a resolution that improves the offer. I know that Councillor Bryn has a clearly articulated position on it and has throughout, in fairness, and working within the parameters that we've currently got, the transformation team are working closely with the governing body of the new setup in Llanfair to see what is able to come of that, because it is a major issue for us to resolve. And part of the challenge that we have around going back to the leakage at transition, one of the areas where we have a worrying leakage is actually from the very successful David Llwyd, where young people are not transitioning in the numbers that we would wish them to onto Welsh medium secondary for whatever reason, and that's something we need to explore with this. And Councillor Bryn's urgency is, I think we all agree with, the solution is more challenging for us.
In the chat, Margaret, one of our lay members, has indicated that she's very supportive of Bryn's comments. I think in summing up this section, I would say that there is obviously a lot more work to do in the secondary area. I think we would challenge officers to use the consultation to explore the potential distribution of Welsh schools into the future, and you've highlighted very specifically the huge concern that in Davydd we have one of the largest unattached primaries in terms of Welsh medium, and there is leakage from there. So I hope we would use the consultation to explore that in some detail and use that to enhance the discussion of Welsh medium provision in North Powys. Because if we are moving away from the position we've held in the current WESP, we need that to be evidence-based, and leakage of pupils is one of the areas, because the last thing I would want us to see is to establish a Welsh medium school that the Newtown pupils don't want to go to for whatever reason. So the challenge from us there, I think, unless anyone disagrees, is that we are looking for the consultation to come back with very strong evidence to support plans that are going to go forward in the West as our ambitions for the development of Welsh medium secondary. I'm seeing more nods from officers than I am from colleagues, but I'm seeing a few nods. Okay, thank you for that. I'm going to move on to the next section, which is around, I've jumped on one to ALN. The next section is around different contexts. I've not had any feedback on this from colleagues in advance of the meeting. So rather than having this introduced by officers, I'm going to go straight to questions, because this was the one area when I looked at it which I felt had more detail in it than some of the others. So Lucy has her hand up, so I'm going to move straight to Lucy.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just an observation really that there didn't seem to be an awful lot in this section about the informal activities going on and the kind of fun things that might encourage pupils to be conversing more in Welsh outside their more formal education. There's a lot of reference to courses and to to more formal things, but not really so much as to fun activities, which I think is really important.
Happy to come in. I'm happy to come in there, Chair. Yes, when you think about the Eisteddfodau, the Mentrau Iaith, and the reference to the external partnerships we've got, I can assure you that a lot of those activities are fun. And just to clarify, the 5 elements of the Siarter Iaith, we want it to be fun, we want to engage in learners and everybody using the Welsh outside in the community. Just to clarify, there are 5 points. Leadership shown at school level. Learners take ownership of the Welsh language. That's key. Learners take ownership through, be it language ambassadors, through Crew Cymraeg. And I can assure you, a lot of the Crew Cymraeg, as you can see the success in the primary, they have had fun activities. They've had Mr. Formula. They've had Dydd Music Cymru. They've had gigs. They've had pedaling bikes to generate music, things like that. There's a lot of fun activities embedded in it. We can highlight it a little bit more, but the Eisteddfod, for example, full of fun. Mentrau, full of fun activities and sports. The point taken.
I'm going to move on to the next section, but before I do it, one way we could look at this when we're looking at producing the final document, it might be nice to have some bullet point case studies and boxes and things like that, highlighting what is happening already and what we want to expand. And this particular area is one where that would lend itself to it very, very effectively.
I think the main point of this one, outcome 5, Chair, is that we want to get the secondary schools on board with the Siarter Iaith to increase the use of Welsh. That's where we're putting a lot of our energy at the moment.
Yeah, it was secondary level that I was more concerned about.
Yeah, we're going to start them on a journey. I'm going to be meeting them through Teams so they can network together, the Siarter Iaith coordinators. They can learn from each other. They need to learn from the primary colleagues, talking about these ambassadors, the Crew Cymraeg in the clusters, and build upon that. And now from Welsh Government, we've heard that they can also go along the accreditation path, something that wasn't promoted in the last 2 years. So we are going to be driving that this term and this year, hence the targets.
Thank you, Delith. I'm going to take the final 2 sections together. And the reason I'm going to do that is we've explored ALN quite extensively when we'd looked at Brohasgyn, and we can look, Wyn can look back at our comments there and compare them to the proposals here to see how they comply. But the main thing that we had consistently was concern about the ability to deliver in terms of manpower. So first question I'm going to open up with combines the 2, and that's how are we going to ensure that we have enough people qualified in both ALN requirements and Welsh language requirements so that we can deliver ALN to Welsh-speaking families.
Thank you. I'll come back on that first, Councillor Pete. Just to note, it's not to Welsh-speaking families, it's to learners who are learning through the medium of Welsh, which hopefully will be significantly greater in number than the number of Welsh-speaking families. But
fair correction.
But the challenge that we've got, and I think we're already on the journey with ALN. You'll be aware of the training program that we have, where we've offered teachers in schools the opportunity to enrol with Birmingham University on postgraduate diplomas in specialisms. Now we realise that there is a significant shortfall in the number of those who are able to work in Welsh, and that I know Hayley and team have it as a priority. We also have quite strong networks now across local authority borders, where growing authorities are seeking to work together on a range of things, in often single projects. We're not shy of that either. If there's expertise that we can tap into, we will. But what we ultimately need to do is build our own workforce, retain our own young people if we can, attract others in, and therefore the school service now has an arrangement for not just the induction of new teachers, but for increasing the number of training opportunities for trainee teachers in Powys. There's also the new stream from Welsh Government, where you can train with the Open University, which is largely an online arrangement, train as a teacher in your local school. And my guess is that if the economy goes the way, the rural economy goes the way people fear it might over the next couple of years, this might actually become an attractive option to people who are trying to work their way over into teaching whilst holding down their current employment. You don't have to opt out and go to college to do it through the OU partnership that Welsh Government has developed. So ALN and the broader workforce are both on the same journey, really. And we need as a service to make sure we're supportive of the channels that we've got.
Thank you for that, Geraint. I'm going to start with Margaret.
Sorry, Pete. The ALN is dependent not only on educational services that are outside the school, such as educational psychologists. Now, that is an important area that has to provide Welsh medium provision, but also you've got other support that has to be through the medium of Welsh that isn't there at the moment, but it's with other agencies. And whilst the plan can't possibly put that in it, it is a major concern when we're talking about additional learning needs, because it certainly isn't there adequately at the moment.
Shall I come back on that, Councillor Beat?
Yeah, please.
I think we need to, this is where I suppose people would read the ALN strategy hand in hand with this, because there's we acknowledge the need and the shortfall, and we're tackling it through the ALN strategy that the service is working to with its partners, and we do need our partners on this journey as well.
I think that's very pertinent, Geraint. I think we do need perhaps a little bit more cross-referencing between the ALN strategy and the WESP in the commentary within the documentation. Thank you again, Geraint. I appreciate you're going to disappear pretty much imminently. Thank you for your contribution today. I think we've almost come to the end of the discussion. Councillor Sandra.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think Margaret has taken some of the, well, part of the question I was going to ask, really, regarding working with health specialists such as speech and language and social services, for example, educational psychologists, as Margaret has mentioned, but through the medium of Welsh, which is very important, because I'm aware that young children might come from Welsh-speaking parents, go into a Welsh medium school, and they are taught and etc. through the medium of Welsh. And then, if they are to be assessed, they are assessed through the medium of English, because the individuals who are coming in do not converse through the medium of Welsh. Now that automatically puts that youngster at a disadvantage, because whether they've got the smattering of English enough to answer the questions or to do whatever they're asked of through the medium of English. So I think there's an awful lot of work that needs to be done to ensure that there is a smooth transition for youngsters, because they are really at a disadvantage. If there was a young child from another country that was put into our areas, we would make sure that there were translators there to do that work and to make sure that they were, their needs were assessed efficiently. And I've got real concerns about the backlog that takes place. If a child needs to be assessed
and perhaps an educational psychologist can't make a meeting, or somebody from social services can't make a meeting, etc. And every delay hampers the child's progress. And I think we really need to get smarter and make sure that if there are multidisciplinary team meetings, everybody needs to be signed up to those, and the conversation needs to be through the medium of Welsh. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Sandra. I think that's a key element, and just re-emphasises the integrated nature of ALN and Welsh that we need to take on board. I'm aware that Hugh has had to leave us. I know, Geraint, you're going to have to disappear in a minute, so I'm going to take Jake's question and then I'm going to wrap things up before I lose both of you.
Thanks, Peter. It's a quick one on costs, and it's probably to take forward to Cabinet as much as anything, but I didn't think I could let it go by looking at the report, the covering report, without mention of costs. So there are some example costs which are given in the paper, but no overall costs. So cost per pupil, cost per school of TROCI and things like that are highlighted, but no overall cost is projected. And whilst the paper suggests that the costs at the moment will be found through the transformation fund, and it will only go back to services at the point that the services are to schools. Once the services are embedded, there's no indication of how long that would be. So there is some lack of clarity about cost apportionment, total cost apportionment, and time frame for that to be adjusted. And in the WESP plan itself, we go for the 14% increase, which is the absolute maximum, and I do applaud that. But what isn't clear is that absolute maximum, as opposed to, say, a 10% increase, which would have still been relatively ambitious, what the additional cost is. Is that a diminishing return or an enhanced return? So for every 1% of ambition that we add over, say, 10% or 14%, bearing in mind we say very clearly we want to exceed the 14% ambition, do we get extra return or diminishing return on our Powys pound? And I think it's relevant for Cabinet in particular to consider that, bearing in mind, you know, we're redistributing scarce resources, and it really doesn't touch upon that. The paper doesn't, and I wondered as whether there's any way that it can, and perhaps Alid can take that away and think about it. All right, thank you.
Shall I come back on that? Very pertinent question. The bottom line is that many of these activities and the growth has a declining marginal cost the more you grow. So, for example, having a starter class teaching in Welsh in a school with 14 learners doesn't cost you any more than if you had 19 learners in the same class. There's virtually no difference in cost there. And that applies to many of the things we've got here. So, for example, you know, a GCSE where you have 26 instead of 16, same teacher, largely same digital resources, a bit of equipment cost. So you're right to say that to go for the 10% instead of the 14% would probably be no real cost saving. It's actually breaking through at any point. It would be what is the cost. Down the track, the cost of teaching through the medium of Welsh or through medium of English is the same. So it's change and transition that bring about costs, apart from TROCI, which would be a permanent and lasting cost in order to make sure that learners can make the transition. So you maintain a service, rain or shine, so that you provide that equality of access for those who want it. But clearly we would need to temper the scale of that service to what experience tells us becomes the normal sort of numbers that we need to deal with. There is a scenario emerging around Brexit, around COVID, that you'll all be aware of. Oh, where did Brexit come from there? Which is the movement of families from town to country. And I think we need to be mindful of that, and trochi really does need to play a part there, where very often new families moving in are actually quite excited by the opportunity for their children to become bilingual, and we need to make sure we can provide that for them without it being an unnecessary challenge. But the marginal cost of the 14 or the 10, I would hazard a guess at it being of no huge significance for the reasons I've just outlined there. But it is ambitious, the 14. Let's see what happens.
Okay,
sorry. Just to come back, finally, I will have to run in a moment. The front doorbell is now ringing. The WESP that goes at the after consultation and everything will need to be mindful of all these issues. There are some of these things that we can put into the document prior to consultation. There are some things you've raised that are actually angles that we need to tease out at consultation, and then the report in the final product needs to be mindful of quite a few of these areas, which are really helpful to us. Thank you.
You really are trying to do my job today, Geraint.
Sorry. I'd fail miserably, but I'm off to play granddad because their grandmother's down with COVID and can't stand up. So I'm off to do my job there. There you go. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you for that,
Thanks very
Geraint.
much. Thank you.
I'm just summing up now anyway. I think looking back at our discussions today, I think we've highlighted a number of areas where we have concerns in the document. Most of those, I think, are concerns that around the fact that there needs to be more discussion, more consultation, and more information available to inform the final document. I don't think, unless anyone disagrees with me, I've seen anything there that gives us cause for concern to enable me to go to Cabinet and say we should be recommending more work before consultation. But I think there are a few recommendations that we've got around clarification on tables, increasing additional information that we would like to see explored and put in before it goes out. Bruno, you're going to come back to me with something you'd like me to clarify that I might have missed. You're mute at the moment, Bryn.
Sorry about that. Yeah. Yeah, you said you didn't think there was anything to go back to Cabinet with concerns about. What about the issues of around Llanfair fundamentally, and whether the first Welsh medium secondary school in North Powys, apart from Brohasgan, should go into the Severn Valley in order to leave space for a second school later on. I mean, that's it seems to me that it's driven entirely by the one governing body, effectively, and there's an issue of democracy there, if you ask me.
Okay, I take on board your point, and I think we picked up on that with the fact of needing to test particularly the assumptions where there are variations between the existing WESP and the current one.
Yeah.
But I can highlight that further. You're going to laugh there. I'm going to say it, but the first time you've responded to us in English, I couldn't hear you because it was coming through as partially muted on the translator channel. I had to switch back to catch you. So the hazards and disadvantages of not being bilingual coming through absolutely perfectly at the end of the meeting. So I've taken that on board. I think that's where we are for this piece of information. We'll be suggesting to Cabinet that there is enough to move forward for consultation on, but there are a few areas that we will highlight that we are strongly encouraging the team to use as part of the consultation process to gain additional information so that the final document going to Welsh Government is more robust and based on a little bit more data gathering on the ground. So thank you all for that. I'm now going to pass across to Wyn in a second to talk about the forward work programme. What I will say before he goes through in detail is that I had a meeting with officers before this one when we were looking at what we as a scrutiny committee are going to be doing moving forward in respect to schools transformation and our wider programme. And we've agreed that we will be continuing looking at every item in the transformation programme, every proposal to school changes, but we are, in order to ease the workload a little bit on officers, we are going to try and focus on getting a lot more of our questions prepared in advance, so that we can have much more structured meetings and focus very much on areas that are coming up that are specific to each proposal, rather than going over in detail some of the areas we've explored in previous ones, where we've established principles for the wider programme. We will explore those principles in relation to each particular proposal, but we will focus our efforts in the scrutiny on things that are unique to individual schools. But with that in mind, with Llanfihangel coming up next week, as with this meeting, I'll send a briefing through as to how I want to structure meetings going forward, and I encourage all of you, even if you aren't able to look at the entire document, to look at specific areas of it, so that you all have specific questions and can come back to me prior to the meeting with your questions, so that we can have a structured session as possible, and hopefully keep to time a little bit more. So with that in mind, Wyn, would you like to go through the forward work programme as it stands? Thank you for your contribution, Delith, and Erlis, thank you as well if you're still with us. Wyn.
Diolch yn fawr, dim problem.
Thank you, Chair. Not really much to add to what's published on with the agenda. As you can see, it's certainly work in progress. Timing for some of the transformation projects, we're still awaiting clarity as to when they're likely to come forward to Cabinet. So that's something we've got to try and build in. A discussion that Chair was alluding to this morning, there's a lot more subject matters to come forward as well, in terms of a number of documents that obviously the committee will need to look at, including funding formula, curriculum for Wales professional learning, admissions and transport, the ALN strategy, secondary school strategy, plus also we are required to do the performance and finance monitoring, and also there's the scrutiny of the budget in early part of next year. So there's a number of things to be programmed in now over the next couple of months.
With that in mind, with Wyn's comments, we are quite a large committee now. And with some of these, I might come back to you and ask you to focus on particular parts of an agenda if we're taking 2 or 3 items in one particular day, so that each of you can focus on one item rather than having to look in passing at 2 or 3, in the hope that we improve the quality of the questions that we're asking, but equally get through the agenda in an expedient fashion. Basically, we have, over the next 6-8 months, we have a very, very heavy workload, and I'm acutely aware of overloading you. So if we all work together, we will get through this and carry on the very high level of scrutiny that we've got a reputation for. Wyn, is there anything else we need to touch on, other than to wish everyone a good evening?
Nothing at all, Chair.
In which case, thanks to all of you for your contributions today. Again, another detailed piece of work that is moving the authority forward. I wish you a pleasant evening. For those of you I don't see, a good weekend, and look forward to seeing you this time next